them and lead them off into slavery, doubtless a dreadful fate, but one whereby, nonetheless, our four villains were hugely entertained. And now came the moment of choosing the fuckers. Those of this class who failed to meet the standards were the cause of no embarrassment, being mature and reasonable men. It was enough to pay them for their trouble, their traveling expenses, and send them home. The 8 experts who had contracted to furnish the fuckers had, furthermore, many fewer obstacles to surmount, since the specifications were by and large concrete and the conditions made no difference at all. Thus it was 50 came to the rendezvous. From amongst the 20 biggest, the 8 youngest and most attractive were singled out, and since in the sequel mention will almost never be made save of the 4 biggest of the 8, I shall restrict myself to naming these. Hercule, with a body hewn in the image of the god whose name he had been given, was 26 years of age and was endowed with a member 8 1/4 inches around by 13 long. Nothing more beautiful nor more majestic has ever been seen. This tool was almost always upright, and with only 8 discharges, so tests revealed, it could fill a pint measure to the brim. Hercule was also very gentle, very sweet, and had an interesting countenance. Antinoios, so named because, like Hadrian's favorite, he had, together with the world's prettiest prick, its most voluptuous ass, and that exceedingly rare. Antinoios wielded a device measuring 8 inches in circumference and 12 in length. He was 30 and had a face worthy of his other features. Bumcleaver lugged a club so amusingly shaped it was nearly impossible for him to perform an embuggery without splitting the ass, whence came the name he bore. The head of his prick resembled the heart of an ox. It was 8 3/8 inches around. Behind it, the shaft measured only 8, but was crooked and had such a curve it neatly tore the anus when penetrating it, and this quality, very precious to libertines as jaded as ours, had made him singularly sought after. Invitus, so named because, no matter what he did, his erection was perpetual, was furnished with an engine 11 inches long and 7 15/16 inches around. Greater ones, who had difficulty stiffening, had been turned away to make room for him who, regardless of the quantity of discharges he produced in a day, rose heavenward at the slightest touch. The other 4 were of about the same dimensions and the same shape. The 42 rejected candidates provided a fortnight's entertainment and, after the friends had put them through their paces and worn them to the bone, they were well rewarded and bidden adieu. Nothing now remained but the choice of the 4 ladies in waiting, and this final stage was without doubt the most picturesque. The president was not the only one whose tastes were depraved. His 3 friends, and especially Dursit, were indeed a little tainted by his accursed, crapulous, and debauched mania which causes one to find a greater, more piquant attraction in an old, disgusting, and filthy object than in what nature has fashioned most divinely. Explaining this fancy would probably be difficult, but it exists in many people. Nature's disorder carries with it a kind of sting which operates upon the high-keyed sort with perhaps as much and even more force than do her most regular beauties. It has been proven, moreover, that when one's prick is aloft, it is horror, villainy, the appalling, that pleases. Well, where are they more emphatically present than in a vitiated object? If 'tis the filthy thing which pleases in the lubricious act, then certainly the more filthy the thing, the more it should please, and it is surely much filthier in the corrupted than in the intact and perfect object. No, as to that there's no doubt. Furthermore, beauty belongs to the sphere of the simple, the ordinary, whilst ugliness is something extraordinary, and there is no question but that every ardent imagination prefers in lubricity the extraordinary to the commonplace. Beauty, health never strike one save in a simple way. Ugliness, degradation deal a far stouter blow. The commotion they create is much stronger, the resultant agitation must hence be more lively. In the light of all this, there should be no cause for astonishment in the fact that an immense crowd of people prefer to take their pleasure with an aged, ugly, and even stinking crone and will refuse a fresh and pretty girl. No more reason to be astonished by that, I say, than at a man who for his promenades prefers the mountains' arid and rugged terrain to the monotonous pathways of the plains. All these matters depend upon our tastes in this connection. Then it is in our power to alter the form of our bodies. Be that as it may, such, as I have said, was the dominating taste of the President and, to tell the truth, the taste which came near to predominating in his three confreres, for when it came to choosing female servants, their views were identical, and we are about to see from this choice that its making bespoke the constitutional disorder and deprivation to which we have just alluded. The most painstaking search was initiated in Paris. The four creatures needed were finally located. However loathsome may be their portraits, the reader will none the less permit me to draw them. That I do so is essential to that aspect of manners the elucidation of which is one of the principal aims of this work. Marie was the name of the first one. She had been servant of a notorious brigand quite recently put to death on the wheel. Whipping and branding had been her penalty. She was 58 years old, had almost no hair left, her nose stood askew, her eyes were dull and rheumy, her mouth large and filled with her 32 teeth. Yes, they were all there, but all were yellow as sulphur. She was tall, raw-boned, having whelped 14 children, all 14 of whom, said she'd strangled from fear they'd turn out ne'er-do-wells. Her belly rippled like the waves of the sea, and one of her buttocks was devoured by an abscess. The second was known as Luzon. She was 60, stunted, hunchbacked, blind in one eye, and lame, but she had a fine ass for her age and her skin was still in fairly good repair. She was as wicked as the devil and forever ready to commit any horror and every extravagance one could possibly demand of her. Therese was 62, she was tall, thin, looked like a skeleton, not a hair was left on her head, not a tooth in her mouth, and from this opening in her body she exhaled an odor capable of flooring any bystander. Her ass was peppered with wounds, and her buttocks were so prodigiously slack one could have furled the skin around a walking stick. The hole in this splendid ass resembled the crater of a volcano, what for width, and for aroma the pit of a privy. In all her life, Therese declared, she had never once wiped her ass, whence we have proof positive that the shit of her infancy yet clung there. As for her vagina, it was the receptacle of everything ungodly, of every horror, a veritable sepulchre whose fetidity was enough to make you faint away. She had one twisted arm and limped in one leg. The fourth was called Fanchon. 6 times she had been hanged in effigy, and not a crime exists in this world she had not committed. She was 69, she was flat-nosed, short, and heavy, she squinted, had almost no forehead, had nothing but 2 old teeth in her stinking maw, and they were ready to fall out. An erysipelas blazed all over her ass and hemorrhoids the size of your fist hung from her anus. A frightful chancre consumed her vagina, and one of her thighs had been entirely burned. She was dead drunk 3/4 of the year, and in that condition, her stomach being very weak, she vomited over everything. Despite the batch of hemorrhoids adorning it, her asshole was naturally so large that all unawares she blew driblets and farts and often more besides. Apart from acting as servants in the luxurious recreation palace the 4 friends had in mind, these women were also to lend a hand at all the convocations and render all the lubricious services and ministrations that might be required of them. As soon as all these matters had been decided and the summer having already begun, they turned their thoughts to the transporting of the various objects which were, during the 4-month sojourn on Dorset's estate, to render its inhabitation comfortable and agreeable. A vast store of furniture and mirrors, of viands and wines and liquors of all kinds were ordered borne thither, workmen were sent there, and little by little the numerous subjects were conducted to the chateau where Dorset, who had gone ahead, received, lodged, and established them as they arrived. But the moment has come to give the reader a description of the renowned temple appointed for so many luxurious sacrifices. Throughout the projected 4-month season, he will observe with what great care they had chosen a remote and isolated retreat, as if silence, distance, and stillness were libertinage's potent vehicles, and as if everything which through these qualities instills a religious terror in the senses had necessarily and evidently to bestow additional charm upon lust. We are going to picture this retreat not as once it was, but in the state of embellishment and yet more perfect solitude that resulted from our four friends' efforts. To reach the place one had first to get to Basel. At that city you crossed the Rhine, beyond which the road became steadily narrower until you had to abandon your carriage. Soon afterward you entered the Black Forest, you plunged about 15 leagues into it, ascended a difficult, tortuous road that, without a guide, would be absolutely impracticable. By and by you caught sight of a sinister and mean hamlet of charcoal burners and gamekeepers. There began the territory Durset owned, and the hamlet was his, as this little village's population was composed almost entirely of thieves or smugglers. Durset easily befriended it, and his first order to the inhabitants was expressly to enjoin them under no circumstances to allow anyone whomsoever to pass on toward the chateau after the 1st of November, the date by which the entire society was to be assembled in it. He distributed weapons to his faithful vassals, granted them certain privileges they had been long soliciting, and the barrier was lowered. That done, and the gates tightly sealed, one will see by the following description how difficult of access was Silling, the name Durset's chateau bore. Having passed the village, you begin to scale a mountain almost as high as the St. Bernard and infinitely more difficult to ascend, for the only way to reach the summit is by foot, not that the route is forbidden to pack mules, but such are the precipices which everywhere border the one so very narrow path that must be followed, that you run the greatest danger if you ride. 6 of the mules used to transport supplies and food perished, taking with them 2 laborers who had though to mount astride them. 5 full hours are required to reach the top of the mountain, and there you come upon another extraordinary feature which, owing to the precautions that had been taken, became a new barrier so insurmountable that none but birds might have overcome it. The topographical accident we refer to is a crevice above 60 yards wide which splits the crest into northern and southern parts, with the result that, after having climbed up the mountain, it is impossible, without great skill, to go back down it. Durset had united these 2 parts, between which a precipice fell to the depth of 1,000 feet and more, by a fine wooden bridge which was destroyed immediately the last of the crew had arrived, and from this moment on, all possibility of communicating with the chateau of Silling ceased. 4. Cross the bridge and you come down into a little plain about 4 acres in area. The plain is surrounded on all sides by sheer crags rising to the clouds, crags which envelop the plain within a faultless screen. The passage known as the bridge path is hence the only one by which you may descend into or communicate with the little plain. The bridge removed or destroyed, there is not on this earth a single being, of no matter what species you may imagine, capable of gaining this small plot of level land. And it is in the center of this flat space so well surrounded, so solidly protected, that one finds Durset's chateau. Yet another wall, 30 feet high, girds it. Beyond the wall a moat filled with water and exceedingly deep defends a last tall and winding enclosure. A low and straight postern finally leads into the great inner court around which all the living quarters are built, and they are very capacious, very well furnished thanks to the arrangements latterly concluded. One discovers a long gallery on the first floor. I would have it remarked that the description I am about to give of the apartments corresponds not to what in former times they may have been, but to the manner in which they had just been rearranged and distributed in accordance with our libertines' common conception. From the gallery you moved into a very attractive dining hall provided with buffets shaped like towers which, communicating with the kitchen, made it possible to serve the company its food hot, promptly, and without the help of any waiters. From this dining hall, hung in tapestries, warmed by heating devices, furnished with ottomans, with excellent armchairs, and with everything which could make it both comfortable and pleasing to the eye, you passed into a large living room or salon, simple, plain, but exceedingly warm and equipped with the very best furniture, Adjacent to this room was an assembly chamber intended for the storyteller's narrations. This was, so to speak, the lists for the projected justs, the seat of the lubricious conclaves, and as it had been decorated accordingly, it merits something by way of a special description. Its shape was semicircular. Set into the curving wall were 4 niches whose surfaces were faced with large mirrors, and each was provided with an excellent ottoman. These 4 recesses were so constructed that each faced the center of the circle. The diameter was formed by a throne, raised 4 feet above the floor and with its back to the flat wall, and it was intended for the storyteller. In this position she was not only well before the 4 niches intended for her auditors, but, the circle being small, was close enough to them to ensure their hearing every word she said, for she was placed like an actor in a theater, and the audience in their niches found themselves situated as if observing a spectacle in an amphitheater. Steps led down from the throne. Upon them were to sit the objects of debauchery brought in to soothe any sensory irritation provoked by the recitals. These several tiers, like the throne, were upholstered in black velvet edged with gold fringe, and the niches were furnished with similar and likewise enriched material, but in color dark blue. At the back of each niche was a little door leading into an adjoining closet which was to be used at times when, having summoned the desired subject from the steps, one preferred not to execute before everyone the delight for whose execution one had summoned that subject. These closets were provided with couches and with all the other furnishing required for every kind of impurity. On either side of the central throne an isolated column rose to the ceiling. These 2 columns were designed to support the subject in whom some misconduct might merit correction. All the instruments necessary to meting it out hung from hooks attached to the columns, and this imposing sight served to maintain the subordination so indispensable to parties of this nature, a subordination whence is born almost all the charm of the voluptuousness in persecutors' souls. One could walk from this semicircular room directly to a chamber which formed the end of this part of the living quarters. This chamber was a kind of boudoir. It was soundproof and secluded, but very warm within, very dark during the day, and its purpose was for private interviews and secluded contests, or for certain other secret delights which will be unveiled in the sequel. To reach the other wing, one had to retrace one's footsteps, and once in the gallery, at the end of which an exceedingly handsome chapel was visible, one entered the opposite wing which completed the circuit of the inner courtyard. You discovered a splendid antechamber adjoined by 4 superb apartments, each having a boudoir and wash cabinets. Splendid Turkish beds canopied in 3-colored damask with matching furniture adorned these suites whose boudoirs offered everything and more of the most sensual that lubricity might fancy. These 4 units, exceptionally well heated and comfortable, were intended for the 4 colleagues, who were perfectly lodged therein. In that the protocols stipulated that their wives were to occupy the same quarters, no separate space was set aside for them. Upstairs, the 2nd story contained about the same number of apartments, but they were otherwise divided. You first came upon, to one side, a vast room bordered by 8 niches, each having a little bed. These were the girls' quarters, and beside them were 2 small chambers for the old women who were to have charge of them. Further along, a pair of pretty rooms had been set aside for 2 of the storytellers. Now turning about and going in the other direction, you found a similar 8-niched room for the little boys. By it were 2 rooms for the duennas appointed to supervise them, and beyond these were 2 more rooms, also alike, for the 2 storytellers. 8 cheerful rooms, as fine as anything you have yet seen, formed the 8 fuckers' quarter, although these individuals were destined to do very little sleeping in their own beds. Below, on the ground floor, were the kitchens and, near them, 6 small chambers for the 6 persons to whom the preparation of food had been confided. Amongst them were 3 cooks renowned for their art. They were all females, women having been preferred for a pleasure outing like this one, and I believe the decision was just. The cooks were assisted by 3 robust young scullery maids, but none of the kitchen staff was to appear at the revels. That was not its purpose, and if the rules imposed in this connection were violated, 'tis merely because libertinage stops at nothing, and the true way of extending and multiplying one's desires is to attempt to impose checks upon them. One of these three underlings was to look after the numerous livestock which had been fetched to the chateau. With the exception of the 4 aged ladies who were meant for household duties, there were no domestics save for these 3 cooks and their seconds. But depravity, cruelty, disgust, infamy, all those passions anticipated or experienced, had erected another locality whereof it is a matter of urgency that we give the sketch, for the laws essential to the proper unfolding of our tale demand that we depict it with thoroughness now. A fatal stone there was which, cunningly made, could be raised from below the step of the altar in the little Christian temple we discerned from the gallery. Beneath that stone one beheld a spiral stairway, very narrow and very steep, whose 300 steps could convey you down into the bowels of the earth, to a kind of vaulted dungeon, closed by triple doors of iron, and in which was displayed everything the cruelest art and the most refined barbarity could invent of the most atrocious, as much for gripping one with terror as for proceeding to horrors. And there below, what tranquillity! To what degree might not the villain be reassured who brought his victim there? What had he to fear? He was out of France, in a safe province, in the depths of an uninhabitable forest, within this forest in a redoubt which, owing to the measures he had taken, only the birds of the air could approach, and he was in the depth of the earth's entrails. Woe, 100 times woe to the unlucky creature who in the midst of such abandonment were to find himself at the mercy of a villain lawless and without religion, whom crime amused, and whose only interest lay in his passions, who heeded not, had nothing to obey but the imperious decrees of his perfidious lusts. I know not what will transpire in that nether place, but this I may say without doing our tale a disservice, that when a description of the dungeon was given the due, he reacted by discharging 3 times in succession. Everything being ready at last, everything perfectly disposed, the subjects installed, the Dew, the bishop, Curville, and their wives, with the 4 second-ranking fuckers in their train, set off, Durset and his wife, together with all the rest, having arrived beforehand, as we have previously noted, and not without infinite difficulty, finally reached the chateau on the evening of the 29th of October. Immediately they crossed it, Durset had the bridge cut. But that was not all. Having inspected the place, the Dew decided that, since all the provisions were within the fortress, and since therefore they had no need to leave it, it were necessary, in order to forestall external attack, which was little dreaded, and escapes from within, the possibilities of which were less unlikely, it were necessary, I say, to have walled shut all the gates, all the passages whereby the chateau might be penetrated, and absolutely to enclose themselves inside their retreat as within a besieged citadel, without leaving the least entrance to an enemy, the least egress to a deserter. The recommendation was put into effect. They barricaded themselves to such an extent there was no longer any trace left of where the exits had been, and then they settled down comfortably inside. After the provisions we have just cited had been taken, the 2 days still remaining before the 1st of November were devoted to resting the subjects, that they might make a fresh appearance at the scenes of debauchery soon to begin, and during this interval the 4 friends labored over a code of laws which, as soon as it was brought to perfection and signed, was promulgated to those concerned. Before advancing to the matter, it is essential that these articles of government be made known to the reader who, after the exact description we have given him of everything, will now have no more to do than follow the story, lightly and voluptuously, his mind impeded by nothing, his memory embarrassed by no unexpected intrusions. Statutes He Company shall rise every day at 10 o'clock in the morning, at which time the 4 fuckers who have not been in duty during the night shall come to pay the friends a visit and shall each bring a little boy. They shall pass from one bedchamber to another successively. They shall perform as bidden by the friends' likings and desires, but during the preliminaries the little boys shall serve only as a tempting prospect, for it has been decided and planned that the 8 maidenheads of the little girls' cunts shall remain intact until the month of December, and their asses shall likewise remain in bond, as shall the asses of the 8 little boys, until the month of January, at which times the respective seals shall be broken, and this in order to allow voluptuousness to become irritated by the augmentation of a desire incessantly inflamed and never satisfied, a state which must necessarily lead to that certain lascivious fury the friends shall strive to provoke, considering it one of lubricity's most highly delectable situations. At 11 o'clock, the friends shall repair to the quarters appointed for the little girls. In that place will be served breakfast consisting of chocolate, or of roasts cooked in Spanish wine, or of other appropriate restoratives. This breakfast shall be served by the 8 little girls, naked, aided by the 2 elders, Marie and Luzin, assigned to the seraglio of girls, the other 2 elders being assigned to that of the boys. If, during this breakfast, the friends are moved to commit impudicities with the little girls, before or after, the latter shall lend themselves thereunto with the resignation prescribed to them, and wherein they shall not be found wanting without severe punishment being the consequence. But it is agreed that at this hour there shall be undertaken no secret or private exercises, and that if a moment's wantonizing be desired, it shall be conducted openly and before the public present at the morning meal. These little girls shall adopt the general custom of kneeling at all times whenever they see or meet a friend, and they shall remain thus until told to stand. They, the wives, and the elders shall alone be subject to these regulations, wherefrom the others are dispensed, but everyone shall be bound never to address the friends save as my lord. Before leaving the girls' apartments, that one of the friends who is invested with the month's stewardship, it being intended that for the space of a month one friend shall be in general supervision of everything, each friend acceding to the office in his turn and in the following order: Dursit during November, the bishop during December, the president during January, the Dew during February. He, then, who is the month's presiding officer, before leaving the girls' quarters, shall inspect them all, to determine whether they are in the state wherein they have been instructed to maintain themselves, whereof the elders shall be each morning apprised, and which will be determined by the need that exists for them to keep in such and such a state. As it is strictly forbidden to relieve oneself anywhere save in the chapel, which has been outfitted and intended for this purpose, and forbidden to go there without individual and special permission, the which shall be often refused, and for good reason, the month's presiding officer shall scrupulously examine, immediately after breakfast, all the girls' water closets, and in the case of a contravention discovered in the one above designated place or in the other, the delinquent shall be condemned to suffer the penalty of death. The friends shall move from there into the little boys' apartments in order to perform the same inspections and similarly to pronounce capital punishment against offenders. The 4 little boys who have not been that morning with the friends, shall now receive them when they enter their chamber and shall untrouser themselves before them. The other 4 shall remain standing in attention, awaiting the orders which are given them. Messieurs may or may not indulge in lewd byplay with the 4 they have not until now seen during the day, but whatever they do shall be done publicly, no intimate commerce shall be held at this hour. At 1 o'clock, those of the girls or the boys, of mature and of young years, who have obtained permission to satisfy urgent needs, that is to say, the heavier sort, and this permission shall never be put most sparingly accorded, and at the most to a third of the subjects, those, we repeat, shall betake themselves to the chapel where everything has been artistically arranged for the voluptuous delights falling under this head. In this place they will find the 4 friends who shall wait for them until 2 o'clock and never any longer, and who shall distribute and adjust them as they judge proper to the delights of this order which they may be moved to taste. From 2 to 3 the first 2 tables shall be served, they shall dine simultaneously, one in the girls' large apartment, the other in that of the young boys. The 3 kitchen servants shall serve these 2 tables. At the first shall sit the 8 little girls and the 4 elders, at the second the 4 wives, the 8 little boys, and the 4 storytellers. During their meal, messieurs will be pleased to gather in the living room where they will chat together until 3 o'clock. Just before this hour, the 8 fuckers shall make their appearance here, as well clothed and as well adorned as it is in their power to be. At 3 shall be served the master's dinner, and the honor to be present there shall be enjoyed by none but the 8 fuckers. This meal shall be served by the 4 wives, entirely naked, aided by the 4 elders, clad as sorceresses. To the latter shall fall the task of bringing the plates from the towers into which the servants, on the other side, shall have put them, and the plates shall be handed to wives, who shall deposit them on the table. The 8 fuckers, in the course of the dinner, will be at liberty to handle and touch the unclothed bodies of the wives in whatever manner and to whatever extent they please, without the said wives being permitted to refuse or defend themselves. The fuckers will even be able to go to the point of employing insults and of thickening their sticks by apostrophizing them with all the invectives they may see fit to pronounce. The friends shall rise from the table at 5, at which time these messieurs only, the fuckers shall retire until the hour of general assembly. These messieurs only, I say, shall pass into the salon, where 2 little boys and 2 little girls, who shall be changed daily, shall, in a state of nudity, serve them coffee and liquor. Nor shall it be at this point in the day's activities messieurs shall permit themselves diversions which might enervate them. Conversation shall be limited to simple jesting. Shortly before 6 o'clock, the 4 children who have been serving, shall withdraw and go promptly to dress themselves. At exactly 6, messieurs shall pass into the assembly chamber heretofore described. They shall each of them repair to their respective alcoves, and the following distribution shall be observed by the others. Upon the throne shall be the storyteller, the tiers below the throne shall be occupied by the 16 children, so arranged that 4 of them, that is to say, 2 girls and 2 boys, shall be situated directly opposite. Each niche shall have before it a like quatrain. This quatrain shall be specially allocated to the niche before which it is placed, the niches alongside being excluded from making any claims upon it, and these quatrains shall be diversified each day. Never shall the same niche have the same quatrain. Each child in each quatrain shall have one end of a chain of artificial flowers secured to his arm, the other end of the chain leading to the niche, so that when the niche's proprietor wishes any given child in his quatrain, he has but to tug the garland, and the child shall come running and fling himself at the master's feet. Above the quatrain shall be situate an elder, attached to the quatrain, and responsive to the orders of the chief of that quatrain's niche. The 3 storytellers who are not on active service as raconteurs during the month shall be seated upon a bench at the foot of the throne, assigned to no one but yet ready to do anyone's bidding. The 4 fuckers appointed to spend the night with the friends may be absent from the assembly. They shall be in their rooms, busy grooming themselves for the coming night, at which time great feats shall be regularly expected of them. With respect to the 4 others, they shall be each one at the feet of one of the friends, who shall be in his niche and upon his couch beside that one of the wives whose turn it is to be with any given husband. This wife shall be at all times naked. The fucker shall wear a close-fitting singlet and shorts of taffeta, pink in color. The month storyteller shall be attired as an elegant courtesan, as shall be her 3 companions. The little boys and the little girls of the quatrains shall always be differently and splendidly costumed, 1 quatrain in Asiatic style, 1 in Spanish, another in Turkish garb, a 4th in Greek, and on the following day otherwise, but all these costumes shall be of taffeta or of lawn. At no time shall the lower half of the body be discomfited by any raiment, and the removal of a pin shall suffice to bear it completely. As for the elders, they shall alternately interpret the Graia, nuns, fairies, sorceresses, and upon occasion, widows. The doors to the closets contiguous to the niches shall be kept at a warm temperature by stoves, and shall be garnished with all the appurtenances required for various debauches. 4 candles shall burn in each of the closets, and 50 in the auditorium. Punctually at 6 o'clock, the storyteller shall begin her story, which the friends may interrupt at any point and as frequently as they please. This narration shall last until 10 o'clock in the evening, and during this time, as its object is to inflame the imagination. Every lubricity will be permitted, save however for those which might be prejudicial to the approved schedule of deflowerings, which shall be at all times rigorously observed. Apart from this, messieurs may do what they like with their fucker, wife, quatrain elder, and even with the storytellers if this whim move them, and that either in their niche or in the adjacent closet. The narration shall be suspended for as long as the pleasures of him whose needs interrupted continue, and when he shall have done and be sated, the tale shall be resumed. The evening meal shall be served at 10. The wives, the storytellers, and the 8 little girls shall without delay proceed to dine by themselves, women never being admitted to the men's supper, and the friends shall sup with the 4 fuckers not scheduled for night duty, and with 4 little boys. Aided by the elders, the 4 other boys shall serve. The evening meal concluded, messieurs shall pass into the salon for the celebration of what are to be called the orgies. Everyone shall convene there, both those who have supped apart and those who have supped with the friends, the 4 fuckers chosen for the night's service being accepted. The salon shall be heated to an unusual temperature, and illuminated by chandeliers. All present shall be naked, storytellers, wives, little girls, little boys, elders, fuckers, friends, everything shall be pell-mell, everyone shall be sprawled on the floor and, after the example of animals, shall change, shall commingle, entwine, couple incestuously, adulterously, sodomistically, deflowerings being at all times banned. The company shall give itself over to every excess and to every debauch which may best warm the mind. When 'tis time for these deflowerings, it shall be at this moment and in these circumstances that those operations shall be performed, and once a child shall be initiate, it shall be available for every enjoyment, in all manners and at all times. The orgies shall cease at precisely 2 in the morning, the 4 fuckers designated for nocturnal exercise shall come, in elegant undress, to lead away each of them the friend wherewith he is to bed. Each friend shall be provided also with one of the wives or with a deflowered subject, when deflowered subjects there be, or with a storyteller, or with an elder to pass the night twixt her and his fucker, and all this according to his disposition, whereunto but one clause is put, that he submit himself to prudent arrangements whence it may result that each friend varies his companions every night, or is able so to do. Such shall be the daily order of procedure. In addition, each week of the 17 prescribed as the period of the sojourn at the chateau shall be marked by a festival. There shall be, first of all, marriages, full particulars relating to which shall be made available in due time and place. But as the first of these matches shall be made between the youngest of the children, who are not able to consummate them, they will in no wise disturb the schedule established for the deflorations. Marriages between adults being all post-defloratory, their consummation will damage nothing since, in acting, the friends shall be enjoying only what has been enjoyed already. The 4 elders, to be held answerable for the behavior of their 4 children, shall, when it is faulty, report it to the month's presiding officer, and each Saturday there shall take place a common meeting out of punishments, at the time of the orgies. An exact list of accumulating delinquencies shall be kept until then. With what regards misbehavior on the part of the storytellers, their punishments shall be 1/2 that of the children, because their talents are to some purpose, and talent must always be respected. As for errors in the conduct of the wives, they shall always be rewarded by punishment double that given the children. Should any subject in some way refuse anything demanded of him, even when incapacitated or when that thing is impossible, he shall be punished with utmost severity. 'Tis for him to provide, for him to discover ways and means. The least display of mirth, or the least evidence given of disrespect or lack of submission during the debauch activities, shall be esteemed one of the gravest of faults and shall be one of the most cruelly punished. Any man taken flagrante delicto with a woman shall punished by the loss of a limb when authorization to enjoy this woman has not hitherto been granted him. The slightest religious act on the part of any subject, whomsoever he be, whatsoever be that act, shall be punished by death. Messieurs are expressly enjoined at all gatherings to employ none but the most lascivious language, remarks indicative of the greatest debauchery, expressions of the filthiest, the most harsh, and the most blasphemous. The name of God shall never be uttered save when accompanied by invectives or imprecations, and thus qualified it shall be repeated as often as possible. With respect to their tone, it shall at all times be exceedingly brutal, exceedingly harsh, and exceedingly imperious when addressing the wives and the little girls, but wheedling, whorish, and depraved when addressing the men whom the friends, by adopting with them the role of women, should regard as their husbands. Any friend who fails to comply with any one of these articles, or who may take it into his head to act in accordance with a single glimmer of common sense or moderation, and above all to spend a single day without retiring dead drunk to bed, shall be fined 10,000 francs. Whenever a friend experiences the need to relieve himself heavily, a woman from that class he considers fitting shall be obliged to accompany him, to attend to those duties he shall during this activity indicate to her. No subject, whether male or female, shall be allowed to fulfill duties of cleanliness whatsoever they may be, and above all those consequent upon the heavy need relieved, without express permission from the month's presiding officer, and if it be refused him, and if despite that refusal he surrender to this need, his punishment shall be of the very rudest. The four wives shall have no prerogatives of any kind over the other women, on the contrary, they shall at all times be treated with a maximum of rigor and inhumanity, and they shall be frequently employed upon the vilest and most painful enterprises, such as for example the cleaning of the private and common privies established in the chapel. These privies shall be emptied only once every week, but always by them, and they shall be severely punished if they resist the work or accomplish it poorly. Should a subject attempt evasion while the assembly is sitting, he shall be punished by death instantly, whomsoever he be. The cooks and their assistants shall be respected, and those of the friends who violate this article shall pay a fine of 1,000 gold louis. With regard to these fines, they shall all be specially employed, upon the return to France, for the initial expenses incidental to a new party, either in this same kind, or in another. These affairs being settled and these regulations published on the 30th, the Jew spent the morning of the 31st inspecting everything, having the statutes repeated aloud, and scrupulously examining the premises to see whether they were susceptible to assault or favorable to escape. Having concluded that one would have to have wings or the devil's powers to get out or in, he reported his findings to the society and devoted the evening to haranguing the women. By his order they were all convoced in the auditorium, and having mounted that kind of tribune or throne intended for the storyteller, here more or less is the speech he delivered to them. Feeble, and fettered creatures destined solely for our pleasures, I trust you have not deluded yourselves into supposing that the equally absolute and ridiculous ascendancy given you in the outside world would be accorded you in this place, 1,000 times more subjugated than would be slaves. You must expect naught but humiliation, and obedience is that one virtue whose use I recommend to you, it and no other befits your present state. Above all, do not take it into your heads to rely in the least upon your charms. We are utterly indifferent to those snares and, you may depend on it, such bait will fail with us. Ceaselessly bear in mind that we will make use of you all, but that not a single one of you need beguile herself into imagining that she is able to inspire any feeling of pity in us. Roused in fury against the altars that have been able to snatch from us some few grains of incense, our pride and our libertinage shatter them as soon as the illusion has satisfied our senses, and contempt, almost always followed by hatred, instantly assumes the preeminence hitherto occupied by our imagination. What, furthermore, might you offer that we do not know by heart already? What will you tender us that we shall not grind beneath our heels, often at the very moment delirium transports us? Useless to conceal it from you, your service will be arduous, it will be painful and rigorous, and the slightest delinquencies will be requited immediately with corporal and afflicting punishments. Hence, I must recommend to you prompt exactness, submissiveness, and a total self-abnegation that you be enabled to heed naught but our desires. Let them be your only laws, fly to do their bidding, anticipate them, cause them to be born. Not that you have much to gain by this conduct, but simply because, by not observing it, you will have a great deal to lose. Give a thought to your circumstances, think what you are, what we are, and may these reflections cause you to quake. You are beyond the borders of France, in the depths of an uninhabitable forest, high amongst naked mountains. The paths that brought you here were destroyed behind you as you advanced along them. You are enclosed in an impregnable citadel, no one on earth knows you are here, you are beyond the reach of your friends, of your kin, in so far as the world is concerned, you are already dead, and if yet you breathe, 'tis by our pleasure, and for it only. And what are the persons to whom you are now subordinated? Beings of a profound and recognized criminality, who have no God but their lubricity, no laws but their depravity, no care but for their debauch, godless, unprincipled, unbelieving profligates, of whom the least criminal is soiled by more infamies than you could number, and in whose eyes the life of a woman— what do I say, the life of a woman? The lives of all women who dwell on the face of the earth, are as insignificant as the crushing of a fly. There will, doubtless, be few you, without the flutter of an eyelash, lend yourselves to them all, and faced with whatever it may be, show patience, submission, and courage. If unhappily, some amongst you succumb to our passion's intemperance, let her adjust bravely to her fate. We are not going to exist forever in this world, and the most fortunate thing that can befall a woman is to die young. Our ordinances have been read to you, they are very wise and well designed for your safety and for our pleasures. Obey them blindly, and expect the worst from us should we be irritated by your misbehavior. Several amongst you have ties with us, I know, and perhaps they embolden you, and perhaps you hope for indulgence on this account. You would be most gravely mistaken were you to put much store by them. No blood attachment is sacred in the view of people like ourselves, and the more they seem so to you, the more their rupture will stimulate the perversity in our spirits. Daughters, wives, it is to you, then, I address myself at present. Expect us to grant you no prerogative. You are herewith advised that you will be treated with an even greater severity than the others, and that specifically to point out to you with what scorn we view the bonds whereby you perhaps think us constrained. Moreover, do not simply wait for us to specify the orders we would have you execute. A gesture, a glance, often simply one of our internal feelings will announce our desire, and you will be as harshly punished for not having divined it as you would be were you, after having been notified, to ignore that desire or flout it. It is up to you to interpret our movements, our glances, our gestures, to interpret our expressions, and above all not to be mistaken as to our desires. Let us suppose, for example, this desire were to see a particular part of your body, and that, through clumsiness, you were to exhibit some other. You appreciate to what extent such contempt would be upsetting to our imaginations, and you are aware of all that one risks by chilling the mind of a libertine who, let us presume, is expecting an ass for his discharge, and to whom some fool presents a cunt. By and large, offer your fronts very little to our sight. Remember that this loathsome part, which only the alienation of her wits could have permitted nature to create, is always the one we find most repugnant. And relative to your ass itself, there are precautions to observe. Not only would you be well advised, upon presenting it, to hide the odious lair which accompanies it, but it behooves you to avoid the display, at certain moments, of an ass in that certain state wherein other folk desire always to find it. You probably understand me, and furthermore, the four duennas will furnish you later on with instructions which will complete the explanation of everything. In short, shudder, tremble, anticipate, obey, and with all that, if you are not very fortunate, perhaps you will not be completely miserable. No intrigues amongst you, no alliances, none of that ridiculous friendship between the girls which, by softening the heart in one sense, in another renders it both more ill-tempered and less well disposed to the one and simple humiliation to which you are fated by us. Consider that it is not at all as human beings we behold you, but exclusively as animals one feeds in return for their services, and which one withers with blows when they refuse to be put to use. You have seen with what stringency you are forbidden anything resembling any act of religion whatsoever. I warn you, few crimes will be more severely punished than this one. It is only too well known that in your midst there are yet a few fools unable to bring themselves to abjure this infamous God and abhor his worship. I would have you know that these imbeciles will be scrupulously examined, and there is no extremity they will not suffer who are so unlucky as to be taken in the act. Let them be persuaded, these stupid creatures, let them henceforth be convinced that in all the world there are not 20 persons today who cling to this mad notion of God's existence, and that the religion he invokes is nothing but a fable ludicrously invented by cheats and impostors, whose interest in deceiving us is only too clear at the present time. In fine, decide for yourselves, were there a God, and were this God to have any power, would he permit the virtue which honors him, and which you profess, to be sacrificed to vice and libertinage as it is going to be? Would this all-powerful God permit a feeble creature like myself, who would, face to face with him, be as a mite in the eyes of an elephant, would he, I say, permit this feeble creature to insult him, to flout him, to defy him, to challenge him, to offend him as I do? Wantonly, at my own sweet will, at every instant of the day. This little sermon concluded, the dew descended from the chair and, with the exception of the 4 elders and the 4 narrators, who knew very well they were there as sacrificers and priestesses rather than as victims, except for those 8 individuals, I say, everyone burst into tears, and the dew, not much touched by the scene, left those enacting it to conjecture, jabber, and complain to each other. In perfect certainty the 8 spies would render a thorough report of everything, and off he went to spend the night with Hercule, the member of the troop of fuckers who had become his most intimate favorite in the capacity of a lover, little Zephyr still having, as a mistress, the first place in his heart. In that upon the following morning everything was to begin, the mechanism was to start functioning, everyone accordingly completed final arrangements, went soundly to sleep, and on the morrow at the stroke of 10, the curtain rose upon a scene of libertinage which was to continue unimpeded, in strict compliance with prescription, until and including the 28th day of February. And now, friend reader, you must prepare your heart and your mind for the most impure tale that has ever been told since our world began, a book the likes of which are met with neither amongst the ancients nor amongst us moderns. Fancy, now, that all pleasure-taking either sanctioned by good manners or enjoined by that fool you speak of incessantly, of whom you know nothing and whom you call nature, fancy, I say, that all these modes of taking pleasure will be expressly excluded from this anthology, of that whenever peradventure you do indeed encounter them here, they will always be accompanied by some crime or colored by some infamy. Many of the extravagances you are about to see illustrated will doubtless displease you, yes, I am well aware of it, but there are amongst them a few which will warm you to the point of costing you some fuck, and that, reader, is all we ask of you, if we have not said everything, analyzed everything. Tax us not with partiality, for you cannot expect us to have guessed what suits you best. Rather, it is up to you to take what you please and leave the rest alone. Another reader will do the same, and little by little, everyone will find himself satisfied. It is the story of the magnificent banquet. 600 different plates offer themselves to your appetite. Are you going to eat them all? No, surely not. But this prodigious variety enlarges the bounds of your choice and, delighted by this increase of possibilities, it surely never occurs to you to scold the amphitryon who regales you. Do likewise here, choose and let lie the rest without declaiming against that rest simply because it does not have the power to please you. Consider that it will enchant someone else, and be a philosopher. As for the diversity, it is authentic, you may be sure of it, Study closely that passion which to your first consideration seems perfectly to resemble another, and you will see that a difference does exist and that, however slightly it may be, it possesses precisely that refinement, that touch which distinguishes and characterizes the kind of libertinage wherewith we are here involved. We have, moreover, blended these 600 passions into the storyteller's narratives. That is one more thing whereof the reader were well to have foreknowledge. It would have been too monotonous to catalogue them one by one outside the body of the story. But as some reader not much learned in these matters might perhaps confuse the designated passions with the adventure or simple event in the narrator's life, each of these passions has been carefully distinguished by a marginal notation, a line, above which is the title that may be given the passion. This mark indicates the exact place where the account of the passions begins, and the end of the paragraph always indicates where it finishes. But as numerous personages participate in a drama of this kind, notwithstanding the care we have taken in this introduction to describe and designate each one, we shall provide an index which will contain the name and age of every actor, together with a brief sketch of them all, so that should the reader, as he moves along, encounter what seems to him an unfamiliar figure, he will have merely to turn back to this index, and if this little aid to his memory suffice not, to the more thorough portraits given earlier. Dramatis personae tihi du de Blangus, 50, built like a satyr, endowed with a monstrous member and prodigious strength, he may be regarded as the depository of every vice and every crime. He has killed his mother, his sister, and 3 of his wives. The Bishop of X is his brother, 45 years old, more slender and more delicate than the dew, a nasty mouth. He is deceitful, adroit, a faithful sectary of sodomy, active and passive, he has an absolute contempt for all other kinds of pleasure, he has brought about the cruel deaths of the 2 children whose sizable fortune was left in trust with him, he is a nervous type, so sensitive he nearly swoons upon discharging. The Precedent de Kerval, 60, a tall, thin, lank man, with sunken, dead eyes, an unhealthy mouth, the walking image of low license and libertinage, frightfully dirty about his body and attaching voluptuousness thereto. He has been circumcised, his erection is rare and difficult, it does take place however, and he ejaculates almost every day. His tastes induce him to prefer men, all the same, he has no scorn for a maid. For singularities in his tastes, he has a fondness for old age and whatever is kin to him in filthiness. He is endowed with a member practically as thick as the dews. In late years he has seemed as though unstrung by debauchery, and he drinks a great deal. He owes his fortune solely to murders and is nominally guilty of one, a dreadful one, whose details are contained in his biography previously given. When discharging, he experiences a sort of lubricious rage, it drives him to cruel deeds. Dursit, banker, 53, a great friend of the Dew, and his schoolmate, he is short, squat, and chubby, but his body looks healthy, pretty, and lair. He has the figure of a woman and all a woman's tastes, by his little firmness deprived from giving women pleasure, he has imitated that sex and has himself fucked at any time of day or night. He is also rather fond of a good mouthing, 'tis the only expedient which is able to afford him an agent's pleasures. His pleasures are his only gods, and he is constantly prepared to sacrifice everything to them. He is clever, adroit, and has committed a profusion of crimes, he poisoned his mother, his wife, and her niece in order to assure his inheritance. His spirit is stoical, stalwart his heart, and absolutely insensible to pity. He no longer stiffens, his ejaculations are most rare, his instants of crisis are preceded by a kind of spasm which hurls him into a lubricious fury dangerous for those who are serving his passions. Constance, the Dew's wife, Dursit's daughter, 22 years of age, she is a Roman beauty, with more majesty than finesse, plump, but well constructed, a superb body, a unique ass, a model ass, hair and eyes very dark. She is not without brains or wit, and but too well senses the horror of her fate. A great fund of native virtue nothing has been able to destroy. Adelaide, Dorset's wife, the president's daughter, a pretty little object, she is 20, blonde, very tender eyes of a lovely, animated blue, she has about her everything of the romantic heroine. A long, well-attached neck, her one defect is her mouth, which is a shade large. Small breasts and a little ass, but all that, though delicate, is fair and well molded. A mind given to fantasy, a tender heart, excessively virtuous and believing, she secretly performs her Christian duties. Julie, the president's wife, elder daughter of the Duke, she is 24, fat, fleshy, with fine brown eyes, a pretty nose, striking and agreeable features, but an appalling mouth. She has little virtue and even pronounced tendencies to uncleanliness, alcoholism, gluttony, and whoredom. Her husband loves her for her defective mouth, this singularity appeals to the president's tastes. She has never been given either principles or religion. Aline, her younger sister, supposed daughter of the Duke, really one of the Duke's wives and the bishop's child, she is 18, has a very agreeable and fetching countenance, abounding health, brown eyes, an upturned nose, a mischievous air although she is profoundly indolent and lazy. She seems as yet to have no temperament and most sincerely detests all the infamies she is victim of. The bishop baptized her behind at the age of 10. She has been left in crass ignorance, knows neither how to read nor write, she abhors the bishop and greatly fears the Duke. She is much attached to her sister, is sober and tidy, speaks oddly and like a child, her ass is charming. Duclos, the first storyteller, 48, preserves her looks, is in good physical health, has the finest ass to be seen. Brunette, full figure, very well fleshed. Champville is 50, she is slender, well made, has lascivious eyes, she is a tribade, and everything about her proclaims it. Her present trade is pimping. She was once fair-haired, has pretty eyes, is long in the clitoris and ticklish in that part, has an ass much worn from service, but is none the less untupped in that place. Martain is 52, she's a procuress too, a matronly dame, hale and hearty, inner obstructions have prevented her from ever knowing any but Sodom's delights, for which indeed she seems to have been specially created, for, her age notwithstanding, she has the world's noblest ass, it is both broad and big and so habituated to introductions that she can accommodate the weightiest engines without the flutter of an eyelash. She has pretty features still, but they are beginning to fade. Desgranges is 56, she is even now the greatest villain who has ever lived, she is tall, slender, pale, and was once dark-haired, she is crime's personification. Her withered ass resembles marbled paper or parchment and its orifice is immense. She is one-dugged, is missing 3 fingers and 6 teeth, fructus belli. There exists not a single crime she has not perpetrated or engineered, her prattle is pleasing to the ear, she has wit, and is currently one of the outfitters most highly respected by society. Marie, the first of the duennas, is the youngest at 58, she has been whipped and branded, and was a servant to thieves. Her eyes are lackluster and running, her nose crooked, her teeth yellow, one buttocks gnawed by an abscess. She has borne and killed 14 children. Luzon, the second duenna, is 60, she is small, lame, one-eyed, and hunchbacked, but for all that she has yet a very pretty ass. She is always ready for crime and is extremely wicked. She and Marie are appointed as governesses to the girls, and the 2 following to the boys. Therese, aged 62, looks like a skeleton, has no hair, no teeth, a stinking mouth, an ass seamed with scars, its hole is of excessively generous diameter. Filthy and fetid to an atrocious degree, she has a twisted arm, and she limps. Fanchon, 69 years old, has been 6 times hanged in effigy and has perpetrated every crime under the sun, she squints, is flat-nosed, short, heavy, has no forehead, 2 teeth only. An erysipelas covers her ass, a bunch of hemorrhoids hangs from her hole, a chancre is eating her womb, she has a burnt thigh, and a cancer gnaws her breast. She is constantly drunk and vomits, farts, and shits here, there, and everywhere all the time, and all unawares she is doing it. Harem of little girls. Augustine, daughter of a Languedoc baron, 15 years old, alert and pretty little face. Fanny, daughter of a Breton councillor, 14, a sweet and tender air. Zelmire, daughter of the Comte de Tervilly, seigneur of Beaussy, 15, a noble look and a very sensitive soul. Sophie, daughter of a gentleman from Berry, charming features, 14 years. Colombe, daughter of a councillor to the Parliament of Paris, 13 years old, exuberant health. Hebe, daughter of an Orleans officer, a very libertine air, charming eyes, she is 12. Rosette and Michette, both look like lovely virgins. The first is 13 and is the daughter of a Chalon-sur-Saône officer, the other is 12 and is a daughter of the Marquis de Sade. She was abducted from her father's estate in Bourbonnais. Their figures, the rest of their features and chiefly their asses are beyond all description. They were chosen from amongst 150. Harem of little boys. Zelamir, 13, son of a Poitou squire. Cupidon, same age, son of a gentleman from near La Flèche. Narcisse, 12, son of a nobleman situated in Rouen, Knight of Malta. Zephyr, 15, son of a general living in Paris. He is destined for the Dieu. Celadon, son of a Nancy magistrate. He is 14. Adonis, son of a judge of a Paris assize court, 15, destined for Curville. Hyacinth, 14, son of a retired officer dwelling in Champagne. Guiton, page to the king, 12, son of a gentleman from the Nivernais. No pen is capable of representing the graces, the features, and the charms of these 8 children. Superior also to all the tongue is empowered to say, and chosen, as you know, from amongst a very large number. 8 fuckers. Hercule, 26, very pretty, but also a very mean character, the Dieu's favorite. His prick measures 8 1/4 inches around and 13 in length. Plentiful discharge. And in oils is 30. A fine specimen of a man, his prick is 8 inches around and 12 inches long. Bumcleaver, 28 years old, has the look of a satyr, his majestic prick is bent saber fashion, its head, or glans, is enormous, it is 8 3/8 inches in circumference and the shaft 8 in length. A fine curve to this majestic prick. Invitus is 25, he is exceedingly ugly, but healthy and vigorous, the great favorite of Curville, he is continually aroused, and his prick is 7 15/16 inches around by 11 inches long. The 4 others measure from 9 to 10 15/16 inches long, by from 7 1/2 and 5/8 inches around, and they are from 25 to 30 years of age. End of the introduction. Omissions I have made in it. 1. I must say that Hercule and Invitus are, the one a very mean character and the other very ugly, and that not one of the 8 has ever been able to enjoy either a man or a woman. 2. That the chapel is used for a toilet, and give details of this usage. 3. That the outfitters, male and female, had cutthroats with them and under their orders during their forays. 4. Give some few more details about the elders' breasts and speak of Fanchon's cancer. Also a few more touches to the descriptions of the children's faces. Part the first day He 150 simple passions, or those belonging to the first class, composing the 30 days of November passed in hearing the narration of Madame Duclos, interspersed amongst which are the scandalous doings at the chateau during that month, all being set down in the form of a journal. The company rose the 1st of November at 10 o'clock in the morning, as was specified in the statutes which Messieurs had mutually sworn faithfully to observe in every particular. The 4 fuckers who had not shared the friends' couches, at their waking hour brought Zephyr to the Dieu, Adonis to Curville, Narcisse to Durset, and Zelamir to the bishop. All 4 children were very timid, even more awkward, but, encouraged by their guides, they very nicely carried out their tasks, and the Dew discharged. His 3 colleagues, more reserved and less prodigal with their fuck, had as much of it deposited in them as did the Dew, but distributed none of their own. At 11 o'clock they passed into the women's quarters where the 8 young sultanas appeared naked, and in this state served chocolate, aided and directed by Marie and Luzin, who presided over the seraglio. There was a great deal of handling and calling, and the 8 poor girls, wretched little victims of the most blatant lubricity, blushed, hid behind their hands, sought to protect their charms, and immediately displayed everything as soon as they observed that their modesty irritated and annoyed their masters. The Dew rose up like a shot and measured his engine's circumference against Michet's slender little waist. Their difference did not exceed 3 inches. Dursit, the month's presiding officer, conducted the prescribed examinations and made the necessary searches. Hebe and Colombi were found to have lapsed. Their punishment was pronounced at once and fixed for the following Saturday at orgy hour. They wept. No one was moved. They proceeded to the boys' apartments. The 4 who had not appeared that morning, namely Cupidon, Celadon, Hyacinth, and Giton, bared their behinds in accordance with orders, and the sight provided an instant's amusement. Curval kissed them all on the mouth, and the bishop spent a moment frigging their pricks while the Dew and Dursit were doing something else. The inspections were completed, no misconduct was discovered. At 1 o'clock messieurs betook themselves to the chapel where, as you know, the sanitary conveniences were installed. The calculation of requirements for the coming soirée having led to the refusal of a good number of requests, only Constance, Duclos, Augustine, Sophie, Zelamir, Cupidon, and Luzin appeared. All the others had asked permission and had been instructed to hold back until evening. Our 4 friends, ranged around the same specially constructed seat, had these 7 subjects take their seat one after another, and then retired when they had enough of this spectacle. They descended to the salon where, while the women dined, they gossiped and tattled until the time came for them to be served their meal. Each of the 4 friends placed himself between 2 fuckers, pursuant to the imposed rule that barred all women from their table, and the 4 naked wives, aided by the elders costumed as the Grea, served them the most magnificent and the most succulent dinner it were possible to concoct. No one more delicate, more skilled than the cooks they had brought with them, and they were so well paid and so lavishly provided that everything could not fail to be a brilliant success. As the midday fare was to be less heavy than the evening meal, they were restricted to 4 superb courses, each composed of 12 plates. Burgundy wine arrived with the hors d'oeuvres, Bordeaux was served with the entrees, champagne with the roasts, Hermitage accompanied the entr'atements, Tokay and Madeira were served with dessert. Spirits rose little by little. The fuckers, whom the friends had granted every liberty with their wives, treated them somewhat untenderly. Constance was even a bit knocked about, rather beaten for having dawdled over bringing a dish to Hercule who, seeing himself well advanced in the Dew's good graces, fancied he might carry insolence to the point of drubbing and molesting his wife. The Dew thought this very amusing. Curval, in an ugly humor by the time dessert arrived, flung a plate at his wife's face, and it might have clove her head in 2 had she not ducked. Spying one of his neighbors stiffen, Dursit, though they were still at table, promptly unbuttoned his breeches and presented his ass. The neighbor drove his weapon home. The operation once concluded, they fell to drinking again as if nothing had happened. The Dew soon imitated his old friend's little infamy and wagered that, enormous as Invitus prick might be, he could calmly down 3 bottles of wine while lying embuggered upon it. What effortlessness, what ease, what detachment in libertinage! He won what he had staked, and as they were not drunk on an empty stomach, as those 3 bottles fell upon at least 15 others, the Dew's head began gently to swim. The first object upon which his eye alighted was his wife, weeping over the abuse she had sustained from Hercule, and this sight so inspired the Dew he lost not an instant doing to her things too excessive for us to describe as yet. The reader will notice how hampered we are in these beginnings, and how stumbling are our efforts to give a coherent account of these matters. We trust he will forgive us for leaving the curtain drawn over a considerable number of little details. We promise it will be raised later on. Our champions finally made their way into the salon, where new pleasures and further delights were awaiting them. Coffee and liqueurs were distributed by a charming quartet made up of Adonis and Hyacinth, 2 appealing little boys, and 2 pretty maids, Zelmire and Fanny. Therese, one of the duennas, supervised them, for it was decreed that wherever 2 or more children were gathered, a duenna was to be on hand. Our 4 libertines, half drunk but none the less resolved to abide their laws, contented themselves with kisses, fingerings, but their libertine intelligence knew how to season these mild activities with all the refinements of debauch and lubricity. It was thought for a moment that the bishop was going to have to surrender his fuck in exchange for the extraordinary things he was wringing from Hyacinth, while Zelmire frigged him. His nerves were already aquiver, an impending crisis was beginning to take possession of his entire being, but he checked himself. The tempting objects ready to triumph over his senses were sent spinning and, knowing there was yet a full day's work ahead of him, the bishop saved his best for the evening. 6 different kinds of liquor were drunk, 3 kinds of coffee, and the hour sounding at last, the 2 couples withdrew to dress. Our friends took a 15-minute nap, then moved into the throne room, the place where the auditors were to listen to the narrations. The friends took their places upon their couches, the Dew having his beloved Hercule at his feet, near him, naked, Adelaide, Durset's wife and the president's daughter, and for Quatrain opposite him, and linked to his niche by a chain of flowers, as has been explained, Zephyr, Guiton, Augustine, and Sophie costumed as shepherds, supervised by Luzin as an old peasant woman playing the role of their mother. At Curville's feet was Invitus, upon his couch lay Constance, the Dew's wife and Durset's daughter, and for Quatrain 4 little Spaniards, each sex dressed in its costume and as elegantly as possible. They were Adonis, Celadon, Fanny, and Zelmire, Fanchon clad as a duenna, watched over them. The bishop had Antinoius at his feet, his niece Julie on his couch, and 4 little almost naked savages for Quatrain. The boys, Cupidon and Narcisse, the girls, Hebe and Rosette, an old Amazon, interpreted by Therese, was in charge of them. Durset had Bumcleaver for fucker, near him reclined Aline, daughter of the bishop, and in front of him were 4 little sultanas, the boys being dressed as girls, and this refinement to the last degree emphasized the enchanting visages of Zelamir, Hyacinth, Colombe, and Michet. An old Arab slave, portrayed by Marie, presided over this quatrain. The 3 storytellers, magnificently dressed as upper-class Parisian courtesans, were seated below the throne upon a couch, and Madame Duclos, the month's narrator, in very scanty and very elegant attire, well rouged and heavily bejewelled, having taken her place on the stage, thus began the story of what had occurred in her life, into which account she was, with all pertinent details, to insert the first 150 passions designated by the title of simple passions. 'Tis no slight undertaking, messieurs, to attempt to express oneself before a circle such as yours. Accustomed to all of the most subtle and most delicate that letters produce, how, one may wonder, will you be able to bear the ill-shaped periods and uncouth images of a humble creature like myself who has received no other education than the one supplied her by libertinage? But your indulgence reassures me, you ask for naught but the natural and true, and I dare say what of these I shall provide you will merit your attention. My mother was 25 when she brought me into the world, and I was her second child. The first was also a daughter, by 6 years my elder. My mother's birth was not distinguished. She had been early bereft of both her father and mother, and as her parents had dwelled near the Recollet monastery in Paris, when she found herself an orphan, abandoned and without any resources, she obtained permission from these good fathers to come and ask for alms in their church. But as she had some youth and health, she soon attracted their notice, and gradually mounted from the church below to the rooms above, whence she soon descended with child. It was as a consequence of one such adventure my sister saw the light, and it is more likely that my own birth might rightly be ascribed to no other cause. However, content with my mother's docility and seeing how she did make the community to prosper and flourish, the good fathers rewarded her works by granting her what might be earned from the rental of seats in their church. My mother no sooner obtained this post than, with her superior's leave, she married one of the house's water carriers, who straightway, without the least repugnance, adopted my sister and me. Born into the church, I dwelled, so to speak, more in the house of God than in our own. I helped my mother arrange the chairs, I seconded the sacristans in their various operations. I would have said Mass had that been necessary, although I had not yet attained my 5th year. One day, returning from my holy occupations, my sister asked me whether I had yet encountered Father Laurent. I said I had not. "Well, look out," said she, "he's on the watch for you. I know he is, he wants to show you what he showed me. Don't run away, look him straight in the eye without being afraid. He won't touch you, but he'll show you something very funny, and if you let him do it he'll pay you a lot. There are more than 15 of us around here whom he's shown it to. That's what he likes best, and he's given a present to us all." You may well imagine, messieurs, that nothing more was needed, not only to keep me from fleeing Father Laurent, but to induce me to seek him out. At that age the voice of modesty is a whisper at best, and its silence until the time one has left the tutelage of nature is certain proof, is it not, that this factitious sentiment is far less the product of that original mother's training than it is the fruit of education? I flew instantly to the church, and as I was crossing a little court located between the entrance of the churchyard and the monastery, I bumped squarely into Father Laurent. He was a monk about 40, with a very handsome face. He stopped me. "Whither are you going, Franken?" he asked. "To arrange the chairs, Father." never fear, your mother will attend to them," said he. Come along with me," and he drew me toward a sequestered chamber hard by the place. "I am going to show you something you have never seen." I follow him, we enter, he shuts the door and, having posted me directly opposite him, "Well, Franken," says he, pulling a monstrous prick from his drawers, an instrument which nearly toppled me with fright. "Tell me," he continues, frigging himself, "have you ever seen anything to equal it?" "That's what they call a prick, my little one. Yes, a prick. It's used for fucking, and what you're going to see, what's going to flow out of it in a moment or two, is the seed wherefrom you were created. I've shown it to your sister, I've shown it to all the little girls of your age. Lend a hand, help it along, help get it out, do as your sister does, she's got it out of me 20 times or more. I show them my prick, and then what do you suppose I do? I squirt the fuck in their face. That's my passion, my child, I have no other. And you're about to behold it?" And at the same time I felt myself completely drenched in a white spurny. It soaked me from head to foot. Some drops of it had leapt even into my eyes, for my little head just came to the height of his fly. However, Laurent was gesticulating. "Ah! The pretty fuck, the dear fuck I am losing," he cried. "Why, look at you. You're covered with it?" And gradually regaining control of himself, he calmly put his tool away and decamped, slipping 20 sous into my hand and suggesting that I bring him any little companions I might happen to have. As you may readily fancy, I could not have been more eager to run and tell everything to my sister. She wiped me dry, taking the greatest care to overlook none of the spots, and she who had enabled me to earn my little fortune did not fail to demand half of my wages. Instructed by this example, I did not fail, in the hope of a similar division of the spoils, to round up as many little girls for Father Laurent as I could find. But having brought him one with whom he was already familiar, he turned her away, the while giving me 3 sous by way of encouragement. "I never see the same one twice, my child," he told me, "bring me some I don't know, never any of those who say they've already had dealings with me." I managed more successfully. In the space of 3 months, I introduced Father Laurent to more than 20 new girls, with whom, for the sake of his pleasure, he employed the identical proceedings he had with me. Together with the stipulation that they be strangers to him, there was another relative for age, and it appeared to be of infinite importance: he had no use for anything younger than 4 or older than 7. And my little fortune could not have been faring better when my sister, noticing that I was encroaching upon her domain, threatened to divulge everything to my mother if I did not put a stop to this splendid commerce. I had to give up Father Laurent. However, my functions continued to keep me in the neighborhood of the monastery. The same day I reached the age of 7 I encountered a new lover whose preferred caprice, although very childish, was nevertheless somewhat more serious. This one was named Father Louis. He was older than Laurent, and had some unidentifiable quality in his bearing that was a great deal more libertine. He sidled up to me at the door of the church as I was entering it, and made me promise to come up to his room. At first I advanced a few objections, but once he had assured me that 3 years ago my sister had come for a visit and that he received little girls of my age every day, I went with him. Scarcely were we in his cell when he closed and bolted the door and, having poured some elixir into a goblet, made me swallow it and then 2 more copious measures too. This preparatory step taken, the Reverend, more affectionate than his confrere, fell to kissing me and, chattering all the while, he untied my apron and, raising my skirt to my bodice, he laid hands, despite my faint strugglings, upon all the anterior parts he had just brought to light, and after having thoroughly fingered and considered them, he inquired of me whether I did not desire to piss. Singularly driven to this need by the strong dose he had a few moments earlier had me drink, I assured him the urge to do so was as powerful as ever it could be, but that I did not want to satisfy it in front of him. "Oh, my goodness, do." "Why yes, my little rascal," quoth the bawdy fellow, "by God yes, you'll piss in my presence and, what's worse, you'll piss upon me. Here it is," he went on, plucking his prick from his breeches, "here's the tool you're going to moisten, just piss on it a little." And thereupon he lifted me up and set me on 2 chairs, 1 foot on one chair, the other foot on the other. He moved the chairs apart as far as was possible, then bade me squat. Holding me in this posture, he placed a container beneath me, established himself on a little stool about as high as the pot. His engine was in his hand, directly under my cunt. One of his hands supporting my haunches, he frigged himself with the other, and my mouth being at a level with his, he kissed it. "Off you go, my little one, piss," cried he, "flood my prick with that enchanting liquid whose hot outpouring exerts such a sway over my senses. Piss, my heart, care not but to piss and try to inundate my fuck." Louis became animated, excited himself. It was easy to see that this unusual operation was the one which all his senses most cherished. The sweetest, gentlest ecstasy crowned that very moment when the liquids wherewith he had swollen my stomach, gushed most abundantly out of me, and we simultaneously filled the same pot, he with fuck, I with wine. The exercise concluded, Louis delivered roughly the same speech to me I had heard from Laurent. He wished to make a procuress of his little whore, and this time, caring precious little for my sister's threats, I boldly guided every child I knew to dear Louis. He had every one of them do the same thing, and as he experienced no compunction upon seeing any one of them a second or third time, and as he always gave me paid payment, which had nothing to do with the additional fee I extracted from my little comrades, before 6 months had passed I found myself with a tidy little sum which was entirely my own. I had only to conceal knowledge of it from my sister. Duclos, the president interrupted at this point, we have, I believe, advised you that your narrations must be decorated with the most numerous and searching details, the precise way and extent to which we may judge how the passion you describe relates to human manners and man's character is determined by your willingness to disguise no circumstance, and, what is more, the least circumstance is apt to have an immense influence upon the procuring of that kind of sensory irritation we expect from your stories. Yes, my lord, Duclos replied, I have been advised to omit no detail and to enter into the most minute particulars whenever they serve to shed light upon the human personality, or upon the species of passion. Have I neglected something in connection with this one? You have, said the president. I have not the faintest notion of your second monk's prick, nor any idea of its discharge. In addition, did he frig your cunt, pray tell, and did he have you dandle his device? You see what I mean by neglected details. Your pardon, my lord, said Duclos, I shall repair these present mistakes and avoid them in the future. Father Louis possessed a very ordinary member, greater in its length than it was around and in general of a most common shape and turn. Indeed, I do recall that he stiffened rather poorly and that it was not until the crisis arrived he took on a little firmness. No, he did not frig my cunt, he was content to enlarge it with his fingers as much as possible, so as to give free issue to the urine. He brought his prick very close 2 or 3 times, and his discharge was rapid, intense, and brief. Nothing came from his mouth but the words, ah, fuck. Piss, my child, piss the pretty fountain, piss, d'ye hear, piss away, don't you see me come? And, while saying that, he intermittently sprinkled kisses on my mouth. They were not excessively libertine. That's it, Duclos, said Durset, the president was right. I could not visualize a thing on the basis of your first telling, but now I have your man well in view. One moment, Duclos, said the bishop, upon seeing that she was about to proceed. I have on my own account a need rather more pressing than to piss. It's had me in its grip for an age and I have the feeling it's got to go. So saying he drew Narcisse to his alcove. Fire leapt from the prelate's eyes, his prick stood up against his belly, foam flecked his lips. It was confined fuck that wished absolutely to escape and which could not be liberated save by violent means. He dragged his niece and the little boy into his closet. Everything came to a pause. A discharge was regarded as something far too portentous not to suspend everything the moment someone was about to produce one. All was to concur to make it delicious. But upon this occasion nature's will did not correspond with the bishop's wishes, and several minutes after having retired to the closet, he emerged from it, furious, in the same state of erection and, addressing himself to Durset, presiding officer for November, put that odd little fellow down for some punishment on Saturday. He said, flinging the child 10 feet away from him, and make it severe, if you please. It was apparent that the boy had not been able to satisfy Monseigneur, and Julie whispered in her father's ear what had happened. Well, by God, then take another, cried the Duke, choose something from one of our quatrains if nothing in yours suits you. Ah, my satisfaction now would be far beyond the damned little that would have been sufficient a moment ago, said the prelate. You know to what we are led by a thwarted desire. I'd prefer to restrain myself, but no undue leniency with that poor little fool, he continued, that's what I recommend. But be at ease, my dear bishop, said Durset, I promise you he'll get a good scolding. 'Tis a fine idea to provide the others with an example. I'm sorry to see you in such a state. Try something else, have yourself fucked. Monseigneur, spoke up Martin, I feel myself greatly disposed to satisfy you, were your excellency to wish it. No, no, Christ, no, the bishop cried, don't you know that there are 1,000 occasions when one does not want a woman's asshole? I'll wait, let Duclos continue, I'll get rid of it tonight, I'll have to find the one I want. Proceed, Duclos. And the friends having laughed right heartily at the bishop's libertine frankness, there are 1,000 occasions when one does not want a woman's asshole. The storyteller resumed in these terms, it was not long after I had attained the age of 7 that one day, following my custom of bringing one of my little comrades to Louis, I found another monk with him in his cell. As that had never happened before, I was surprised and wanted to leave, but Louis having reassured us, my little friend and I went boldly in. Well there, Geoffrey, Louis said to his companion, pushing me toward him, did I not tell you that she was nice? Why yes indeed, she is, said Geoffrey, taking me upon his knees and giving me a kiss. How old are you, my little one? 7, father. Just 50 years younger than I, said the good father, kissing me anew. And during this little dialogue, the syrup was being prepared and, as it was customary, each of us swallowed 3 big glasses of it, but, as it was not customary for me to drink when I brought Louis a toy, because he only expected a sprinkling from the girl I brought, because I did not usually stay for the ceremony but used to leave at once, for all these reasons I was astonished by their actions, and in a tone of the most naive innocence I inquired. And why do you have me drink, good father? Do you want me to piss? To be sure, we do, my child, quoth Geoffrey, who still had me squeezed between his thighs and whose hands were already straying over my front. Yes, you're to piss, and the adventure is to take place with me. It will be, perhaps, a little different from the other one you experienced here. Come into my cell, let's leave Father Louis with your little friend, and let's get to business ourselves. We'll return when all our needs are satisfied. We left. Before going, Louis told me in a whisper to be very obliging with his friend, and said I'd not regret it if I were. Geoffrey's cell was not far from Louis, and we reached it without being seen. No sooner inside than Geoffrey, having barricaded the door, told me to get rid of my skirts. I obeyed. He himself pulled my shift above my navel and, having seated me on the edge of his bed, he spread my thighs as wide as it were possible, at the same time thrusting me back in such a way my belly came into full view and my weight rested entirely upon the base of my spine. He besought me to keep in that position and to begin to piss immediately. He gave one of my thighs a little slap with his hand. Then, scrutinizing me for a moment in this attitude, with one hand he separated the lips of my cunt, with the other he unbuttoned his breeches and with quick and energetic movements began to shake a dark, stunted little member which seemed not much inclined to respond to what was required of it. To give it some encouragement, our man set about doing his duty and proceeded to his chosen custom, the one which procured him the greatest possible titillation. Down he went on his knees, I say, between my legs, spent another instant peering into the little orifice I presented to his eye, several times applied his mouth to it, between his teeth muttering certain luxurious phrases I cannot remember because at the time I did not understand them, and continued to agitate that sullen little member, which, though fearfully bullied, did not budge. Finally, he sealed his lips to those of my cunt. I received the signal, and instantly draining what my bladder contained into the gentleman's mouth, I flooded him with a stream of urine he swallowed as fast as I launched it into his gullet. Whereupon his member unfurled, and its proudly lifted head throbbed against one of my thighs. I felt it bravely spray his debilitated manhood's sterile issue. Everything had been so well managed. He swallowed the final drops at the same moment. His prick, confused by his victory, wept bloody tears over it. Trembling in every limbs, Geoffrey got to his feet, and I observed that he no longer had for his idol, once the incense had been extinguished, the same religious fervor he had while delirium, inflaming his homage, still sustained its glory. He rather abruptly gave me 12 sous, opened the door without asking me, as had the others, to bring him girls. He was evidently furnished by someone else, and, pointing the way to his friend's cell, told me to go there, said that he was in a hurry, that he had his offices to perform, that he could not conduct me himself, and then shut his door without affording me the chance to answer him. "Oh yes indeed," said the Dew, "unnumbered are they who absolutely cannot bear the instant when the illusion is shattered. It seems as if one's pride suffers when one lets a woman see one in such a state of feebleness, and disgust would appear to be the result of the discomfiture one experiences at such moments." "No," said Kerval, whom Adonis, kneeling, was frigging, and whose hands were wandering over Zelmire, "no, my friend, pride has nothing to do with it, but the object which is in the profoundest sense devoid of all value save the one our lust endows it with, that object, I say, shows itself for what in truth it is once our lubricity has subsided. The more violent has been the irritation, the more this object is stripped of its attraction when this irritation ceases to sustain it, just as we are more or less fatigued after greater or lesser exertion, and this aversion we thereupon sense is nothing but the sentiment of a glutted soul whereunto happiness is displeasing because happiness has just wearied it. But from this aversion, all the same, spoke up Dursit, is often born a plan for revenge, whose fatal consequences have often been observed." "Yes, but that's another matter," Kerval replied, "and as the aftermath of these recitals will perhaps afford us examples of what you're saying, let's not anticipate through dissertations what will be naturally produced of itself." "President, be frank," said Dursit, on the verge of running amok yourself. "I believe that at the present moment you prefer to prepare yourself to feel how one enjoys than to discuss how one becomes disgusted." "Why, not at all, not a bit of it," said Kerval, "I am as cool as ice." "To be sure, yes," he continued, kissing Adonis' lips, "this child is charming. But he's not to be fucked. I know of nothing worse than your damnable regulations. One must reduce oneself to things, to things. Go on, Duclos, go on, continue, for I have the feeling I might perpetrate something foolish, and I want my illusion to remain intact at least until I go to bed." The President, perceiving his engine beginning to rebel, sent the two children back to their posts and, lying down beside Constance, who, pretty as she was, doubtless failed to stimulate him as much, he a second time besought Duclos to resume her story. She did at once, as follows: "I rejoined my little comrade. Louis had been serviced, not very well pleased. We both left the monastery. I almost resolved not to return again. Geoffrey's tone had wounded my little pride, and without probing further to determine the origins of my displeasure, I liked neither its apparent cause nor its consequences. However, it had been written in my destiny that I was to have yet a few more adventures in that pious retreat, and the example of my sister, who had, so she told me, done business with 14 of its inhabitants, was to convince me that I was still far from the end of my tour. 3 months after this last episode, I became aware of overtures being made to me by another one of these reverend fathers, this one a man of about 60. He invented every kind of ruse to lure me to his room. One of them succeeded, so well in fact that one fine Sunday morning I found myself there, without knowing why or how it had happened. The old rascal, known as Father Henry, shut and locked the door as soon as I had crossed the threshold, and embraced me with exceeding warmth. "Ah, little imp," cried he, transported with joy, "I've got you now, you'll not escape me this time, ha!" The weather was extremely cold at the time, my little nose was running as children's usually do in the winter. I drew out a handkerchief. "What's this? What's this?" "Be careful there," warned Henry, "I'm the one who'll attend to that operation, my sweet." And having stretched me out upon his bed with my head a little to one side, he sat down next to me and raised my head upon his lap. He peered avidly at me, his eyes seemed ready to devour the secretion oozing from my nose. "Oh, the pretty little snot face," said he, beginning to pant, "how I'm going to suck her." Therewith bending down over me, and taking my nose in his mouth, not only did he devour all the mucus between my nose and mouth, but he even lewdly darted the tip of his tongue into each of my nostrils, one after the other, and with such cleverness he provoked 2 or 3 sneezes which redoubled the flow he desired and was consuming so hungrily. But ask me for no details bearing upon this fellow, messieurs, nothing appeared, and whether because he did nothing, or because he did it all in his drawers, there was nothing to be seen, and amidst the multitude of his kisses and lecherous lickings there was nothing outstanding which might have denoted an ecstasy, and consequently it is my opinion that he did not discharge. All my clothes were in place, even his hands stayed still, and I give you my word that this old libertine's fantasy might be performed upon the world's most respectable and least initiated girl without her being able to suppose there was anything lewd in it at all. But the same could not be said of the one that chance presented to my consideration the same day I turned 9 years old. Father Etienne, that was the libertine's name, had several times asked my sister to bring me to him, and she had got me to promise to go alone. For she was unwilling to accompany me, fearing lest my mother, who already scented something in the wind, might find out. Well, I was planning to pay him a visit when, one day, I ran directly into him in a corner of the church, near the sacristy. His manner was so gracious, he argued so persuasively that he had no need to drag me away by main force. Father Etienne was about 40, a healthy, robust, snapping fellow. We were no sooner closeted together than he asked whether I knew how to frig a prick. Alas! Said I, blushing to the ears, I don't even know what you're talking about. Well then I'll explain, my chit, said he, bestowing heartfelt kisses upon my mouth and eyes. My unique pleasure in this world is to educate little girls, and the lessons I give are so excellent they prove unforgettable. Begin by removing your skirts, for if I am to teach you how you must proceed in order to give me pleasure, 'tis only fair that at the same time I teach you what to do in order to receive it, and that lesson cannot be a success if anything hinders us. Here we go. We shall begin with you. What you behold down here, said he, placing his hand on my mound, is called a cunt, and this is what you must do in order to awaken very felicitous sensations in it. With one finger one will do lightly rub this little protuberance you feel here. It, by the way, is called the clitoris. I followed instructions. There, you see, that way, my little one, while one hand is busy there, let one finger of your other hand gradually work its way into this delicious crack. He adjusted my hands. That's the way, yes. Well, don't you feel anything, he asked, keeping me to my task. No, father, I truly don't, I answered most naively. Ah, that's because you are still too young, but 2 years from now you'll see the pleasures it gives. Wait, I interrupted, I think something's happening. And with all imaginable vigor I earned the places he had pointed out. Yes, sure enough, a few faint titillations convinced me that what I'd begun was worth continuing, and the extensive use I have made ever since of this relief-providing exercise has more than once persuaded me of my master's competence. And now 'tis my turn, said Etienne, for your pleasures arouse my desires, and I simply must share them, my angel. Here we are, take this, he said, inviting me to grip a tool so monstrous my 2 little hands were scarce able to close around it. Take this, my child, 'tis called a prick, and this movement here, he went on, guiding my wrists in rapid jerks, this action is called frigging. Thus, by means of this action you frig my prick. Go to it, my child, put all your strength to it. The more rapid and persistent your movements, the more you will hasten a moment which, believe me, I cherish. But bear one essential thing in mind, he added, all the while directing my flying hands, be careful at all times to keep the tip uncovered. Never allow the skin, we call it the prepuce, to cover it over. Were this prepuce to happen to cover this part, which we call the glans, all my pleasure would vanish. That's it, we're shortly going to see something, my little one, My teacher continued, "Watch me do on you what you did on me." And pressing himself against my chest as he spoke and as I kept in motion, he placed his hands so adroitly, he wriggled his fingers with such high art that pleasure rose at last to grip me, and it is without a shadow of a doubt to him I owe my initiation. And then, my head reeling, I abandoned my task, and the Reverend, not yet ready to complete it, consented to forget his pleasure for a moment in order to devote himself exclusively to cultivating mine, and when he had caused me to taste it all, he had me resume the work my ecstasy had obliged me to interrupt, and very expressly enjoined me to keep my mind strictly on what I was about and to care for naught but him. I did so with all my soul. It was only just, I surely owed him my thanks. I went so merrily to work, and I observed all his instructions so faithfully that the monster, vanquished by such rapid vibrations, finally spewed forth all its rage and covered me with its venom. Thereupon Etienne seemed to go out of his mind, borne aloft in the most voluptuous delirium, ardently he kissed my mouth, he fondled and figged my cunt, and the wildness in his speech still more emphatically declared his disorder. Gross expressions, mingling with others of the most endearing sort, characterized this transport, which lasted quite a while, and whence at last the gallant Etienne, so unlike his piss-swallowing colleague, emerged to tell me that I was charming, that he greatly hoped I would come back to see him, and that he would treat me. Every time as he was going to now, pressing a silver coin into my hand, he conducted me back to the place he had brought me from and left me wonderstruck, thrilled, and enchanted with this latest good fortune. Feeling much better about the monastery, I decided to return to it often in the future, persuaded that the more I advanced in age, the more agreeable adventures I would meet with there. But destiny called me elsewhere, more important events awaited me in a new world, and upon returning to my house I learned news which was soon to sober the elation produced in me by the happy outcome of my latest experience. Here a bell was heard struck in the salon, it announced supper. Whereupon Duclos, generally applauded for the auspicious little beginnings she had made, descended from the stage, and, after having made a few adjustments to repair the disorder all four of them seemed to be in, the friends turned their thoughts to new pleasures, and hastened to find out what Comus held in store for them. This meal was to be served by the 8 little girls, naked. Having been wise enough to leave the auditorium a few minutes early, they stood ready the moment the masters entered these fresh surroundings. The table companions were to be 20 in number, the libertine quartet, the 8 fuckers, the 8 little boys. But, still furious with Narcisse, the bishop wished to veto his presence at the banquet, and as it was perfectly natural that they make allowances for one another's whims and observe a mutual tolerance, no one raised his voice to contest the sentence, and the poor little simpleton was confined alone in a dark closet to await that stage in the orgies when perhaps Monseigneur might be inclined to make friends with him again. The wives and the storytellers, dining apart, had concluded their meal in great haste in order to be ready for the orgies. The elders directed the movements of the 8 little girls, and dinner was begun. This meal, much heavier than the one which had been eaten earlier in the day, was served with far greater opulence and splendor. I began with a shellfish soup and hors d'oeuvres composed of 20 dishes, 20 entrees came on next, and soon gave way to another 20 lighter entrees made up entirely of breasts of chicken, of assorted game prepared in every possible way. This was offset by a serving of roasts, everything of the rarest imaginable was brought on. Next arrived some cold pastry, soon afterward 26 entremets of every description and form. The table was cleared, and what had just been removed was replaced by a whole array of cold and hot sugared pastries. Dessert finally appeared, a prodigious number and variety of fruits, though the season was winter, then ices, chocolate, and the liqueurs which were taken at table. As for the wines, they varied with each service. Burgundy accompanied the first, 2 kinds of Italian wine came with the second and third, Rhine wine with the fourth, with the 5th, Rhone wines, sparkling champagne with the 6th, 2 kinds of Greek wine with the other 2 courses. Spirits were prodigiously roused, for, as distinct from lunch, one was not granted permission during dinner to take the waitresses to task, or with that same severity, these creatures, being the very quintessence of what the company had to offer, had to be treated rather more sparingly, but, on the other hand, the friends indulged in a furious round of impurities with them. Half drunk, the Jew said he would not touch another drop, from now it was Selmayer's urine or nothing, and he drained 2 large glasses of it, which he obtained by having the child climb upon the table and squat over his plate. "Why, there's nothing to drinking, weak young piss," said Kerval, and, calling Fanchon to him, "Come hither, venerable bitch, I'd slake my thirst at the very source." And thrusting his head between the old crone's legs, he greedily sucked up the impure floods of poisonous urine she darted into his stomach. And now their words grew heated, they argued various philosophical problems and considered several questions relating to manners. I leave it to the reader to imagine the purity of those discourses and the loftiness of their moralizing. The Jew undertook an encomium of libertinage, and proved that it was natural, and that the more numerous were its extravagances, the better they served the Creator of us all. His opinion was generally acclaimed, enthusiastically applauded, and they rose to go and put into practice the doctrines which had just been established. Everything was ready in the orgy salon. The women were there, already naked, lying upon piles of pillows on the floor, strewn promiscuously amongst the young catamites who had hastened away from table a little after dessert. Our friends reeled in, 2 elders undressed them, and they fell upon the flock like wolves assailing a sheepfold. The bishop, whose passions had been cruelly irritated by the obstacles they had encountered of late, laid hands on Antinous' sublime ass while Hercule skewered him, and vanquished by this latest sensation and by the important and doubtless so much desired service Antinoius was rendering him, he finally spat out streams of semen so hard driven and so pungent he swooned in ecstasy. Bacchus whiles had spellbound senses glutted from excess, numbed from luxury, our hero passed from his faint to a sleep so profound he had to be carried to his bed. The Jew was having a marvelous time. Kerval, recollecting what Martain had offered the bishop, stuffed her while he got his own ass stoppered. 1,000 other horrors, 1,000 other infamies accompanied and succeeded those, and our 3 indomitable champions, for the bishop no longer was of this world, our valorous athletes, I say. Escorted by the 4 night-toiling fuckers who had not been at the revels but who now came to fetch them, retired with the same wives who had shared their couches during the story time. Luckless victims of their brutality, upon whom it is only too likely they showered more outrages than caresses, and who, it is equally probable, inspired in them more disgust than pleasure. Such were the events that transpired on the first day. The second day tea company rose at the customary hour. The bishop, entirely recovered from his excess, and who, waking at 4 in the morning, was deeply shocked to find they had let him go to bed unaccompanied, had summoned Julie and his fucker for the night to come and occupy their posts. They answered the call instantly, and in their arms the libertine plunged back into the thick of new impurities. When, in keeping with regulations, breakfast had been taken in the girls' quarters, Dursad went on his rounds, and, notwithstanding all the arguments he heard, further delinquencies appeared to his eyes. Michet was guilty of one kind of fault, and Augustine, whom Kerval had ordered to keep herself throughout the day in a certain state, was found in the absolutely opposite state. She declared she had forgotten, made 100 apologies, and promised it would not happen again, but the quadrumvirate was inexorable, and both names were inscribed on the list of punishments to be executed come the first Saturday. Highly dissatisfied with all these little girls' ineptness in the art of masturbation, annoyed by the effects of this awkwardness with which he had been obliged to put up the previous evening, Dursad proposed that 1 hour in the morning be set aside for giving them lessons, and that the friends take turns rising an hour early, the exercise period being set from 9 until 10. One friend would rise at 9 every morning, I say, to participate in the training. It was decided that the supervisor would be seated comfortably in a chair in the middle of the harem, and that each little girl, led forth and guided by Duclos, the best frigger in the castle, would demonstrate upon the friend, would direct the little girl's hand, her motion, would explain the intricacies of tempo, how much and how little speed was required and how that depended on the patient's condition, would also explain what attitudes and postures were most conducive to the operation's success. Furthermore, punishments were fixed for her who at the end of a fortnight, despite the lessons, should fail of perfect proficiency in this art. It was emphasized to the little girls that, pursuant to the good ecclesiastic's doctrines, the glans was to be kept uncovered at all times, and that the hand not in action was meanwhile continually to be employed exciting the adjacent areas, this in keeping with the particular fancy of the patient. The financier's proposal pleased everyone. Duclos was informed, she accepted her appointment, and that same day she set up a frigging dummy upon which, in their spare time, the little girls could exercise their wrists and maintain the necessary degrees of agility and suppleness. Hercule was given the same instructorship in the boys' chamber, they being, as always, more skilled in this technique than the girls, because in the case of boys it is merely a question of doing for others what they do unto themselves. A week was ample time to turn them into the most delicious corps of friggers you could ever hope to meet with. On this particular morning, not one of them was found at fault, and Narcisse's behavior of the previous day having brought about the refusal of all permissions, the chapel was empty save for Duclos, a pair of fuckers, Julie, Therese, Cupidon, and Zellmeyer. Kerval was stiff as a ramrod. Adonis had inspired an astonishingly high temperature in him when, that morning, he had visited the boys, and it was generally thought he would erupt while watching Therese and the two fuckers manage their affairs, but he kept a grip upon himself. The midday meal was the usual affair, but the president, having drunk a singular amount and frolicked about even more while eating, became inflamed all over again when coffee was served by Augustine and Michette, Zélamir and Cupidon, directed by old Fanchon, whom out of whimsy they had commanded to be as naked as the children. From this contrast Kerval's new lubricious furor was born, and he gave himself over to some choice extravagances at the expense of Zélamir and the duenna. This riotous conduct finally cost him his fuck. The Dew, pike aloft, closed in upon Augustine, he brayed, he swore, he waxed unreasonable, and the poor little thing, all a-tremble, retreated like a dove before the bird of prey ready to pounce upon it. He limited himself, however, to a few libertine kisses, and was content to give her an introductory lesson in advance of the ones she was to begin the following morning. The two others, less animated, having already started their naps, our two champions imitated them, and the quartet did not wake until 6 o'clock, the hour when the storytelling began in the throne room. All the previous day's quatrains had been altered with respect to both subjects and dress, and our friends had these couch companions. The Dew shared his niche with Aline, the bishop's daughter and consequently his own niece. Beside the bishop lay his sister-in-law, Constance, the Dew's wife and Durset's daughter. Durset was with Julie, the Dew's daughter, the president's wife. That he might be roused from sleep and roused to more, Kerval had with him Adelaide, Durset's wife, one of the creatures in this world it gave him the greatest pleasure to tease because of her virtue and her piety. He opened up with a few scurril jests and low pranks, and having ordered her throughout the séance to maintain a posture that sorted well with his tastes, but which the poor woman found very tiresome to maintain, he threatened her with all his anger might produce were she to budge or give him a moment's inconvenience. Everything being ready, Duclos ascended the platform and resumed her narration in this wise: 3 days having elapsed since my mother had appeared at the house, her husband, far more uneasy about his belongings and his money than about her, took it into his head to enter her room, where it was their custom to hide their most precious possessions, and what was his astonishment when, instead of what he was seeking, he found nothing but a note, written by my mother, advising him to make the best of his loss because, having decided to leave him forever, and having no money of her own, she had been forced to take all she had been able to make off with. As for the rest, he was to blame himself and his hard use of her for her departure and for her having left him with 2 daughters who were, however, certainly worth as much as and possibly more than what she had removed. But the old gaffer was far from judging equal what now he had and what he had just lost, and the dismissal he graciously gave us, together with the request we not even sleep in the house that night, was convincing evidence some discrepancy existed between his way of reckoning and my mother's. Not much afflicted by a compliment which gave us full liberty to launch forth unimpeded into the little mode of life that was beginning to please us so much, my sister and I thought only to collect our few belongings and to bid as swift a farewell to our dear stepfather as he had seen fit to bid us. Without the loss of a minute, we withdrew, and while waiting to decide how best to come to grips with our new destinies, we took lodgings in a small room in the neighborhood. Our first thoughts turned to what might be our mother's fate and whereabouts. We had not the least doubt but that she had gone to the monastery, having decided to live secretly with some father, or that she was being kept somewhere in the vicinity, and this was the opinion we held, without being unduly concerned, when a friar from the monastery brought us a note that bore out our conjectures. The substance of the note was that we would be very well advised, immediately night had fallen, to come to the monastery and speak to the Father Superior, who was the note's author. He would wait for us in the church until 10 o'clock and would lead us to the place presently occupied by our mother, whose actual happiness and peace he would gladly have us share. He very energetically urged us not to fail to come, and above all to conceal our movements with all possible care, for it was essential our stepfather know nothing of what was being done in behalf of both our mother and ourselves. My sister, 15 years old at the time and hence more clever and more reasonable than I, who was but 9, after having dismissed the bearer of the letter and given him the reply that she would ponder its contents, admitted she found all these maneuvers very peculiar indeed. "Franken," says she, "let's not go. There's something wrong with it. If this were an honest proposal, why wouldn't mother have either added a few words or made some kind of sign? Father Adrian, her best fiend, left there almost 3 years ago, and since then she's only dropped in at the monastery while passing by, and hasn't had any other regular intrigue there. What would have led her to choose this place for hiding? The Father Superior isn't her lover and never has been. I know, it's true she has amused him 2 or 3 times, but he's not the man to lose his head over a woman for that slender reason. He's even more inconstant and brutal to women once his caprice is satisfied. And so why would he have taken such an interest in our mother? There's something queer about it, I tell you. I never liked that old superior. He's wicked and harsh, and he's a brute. Once he got me into his room, there were 3 more of them there, and after what happened to me then I swore I'd never set foot in the place again. If you take my advice, you'll leave all those nasty monks alone. There's no reason why I shouldn't tell you so now, Franken. I have an acquaintance, a good friend, I die say, her name is Madame Guerin. I've been going to her place for the past 2 years, and in all that time not 1 week has gone by without her arranging something nice for me. But none of those 6-penny fucks like the ones at the monastery. I get at least 3 crowns from every one. Here, there's proof of it," my sister continued, showing me a purse containing more than 10 louis. "You can see I'm able to make my own way in the world. Well, my advice to you is to do what I do. Guerin will take you on, I'm sure of it. She got a glimpse of you a week ago when she came to fetch me for a party, and she told me to make you a proposal, and she said that, young as you are, she'd always find some way of placing you. Do like me, I tell you, and we'll be well off in no time. Now, that's all I've got to say to you. I'll pay your expenses for tonight, but from then on don't count on me, little sister. Each for himself in this world. That's what I say. I've earned that money with my body and my fingers, do the same yourself. And if you have any qualms, Go talk it over with the devil, but don't come looking for me. Well, I've told what I think, and I'll tell you now that I'd sooner stick my tongue 2 feet out than give you even a glass of water for nothing. As for mother, I don't care what's happened to her. As a matter of fact, even if it's the worst, I'm perfectly delighted, and all I hope is that the whore is far enough away so I'll never see her again for the rest of my life. I know all the things she did to prevent me from getting anywhere in the trade, and all the while she was giving me that fine advice, the bitch was doing things 3 times worse. So, may the devil take her, and above all not bring her back. That's all I care. Not having, to tell you the truth, a heart more tender, nor a soul much more generous than my sister's, it was in all good faith I echoed the invectives wherewith she pilloried that excellent mother. And thanking my sister for the helpful words she promised to speak in my behalf, I in my turn promised to follow her to this woman's house and, once I had been adopted, to put an end to my reliance on her. As for refusing to go to the monastery, we were fully agreed. If indeed she is happy, so much the better for her, I commented, and in that case we can look out for our own welfare without having to go and submit to the same fate. And if it is a trap they're setting for us, we've got to avoid it. Whereupon my sister embraced me. No. Splendid, said she, I see you're a good girl. Don't worry, we're going to make a fortune. I'm pretty, so are you, we'll earn as much as we want, my chit, but don't become attached to anyone, remember that. One today, another tomorrow, you've got to be a whore in body and soul. As for myself, she went on, I'm one now, such as you see me, and there isn't any confessional, or priest, or counsel, or threat that could ruin things for me. By Jesus, I'd go show my ass on the sidewalk as calmly and coolly as I'd drink a glass of wine. Imitate me, Franken, be amenable and you can get anything out of men. The trade's a little hard in the beginning, but you'll get along and things get better. So many men, so many tastes. At first you've got to expect it, one of them wants one thing, another wants something else. But that doesn't matter, you're there to please and give them service, the customer is always right. It doesn't take long, and then the money's in your pocket. I admit I was amazed to hear such wild remarks from a girl so young, who had always seemed to me so decent. But as my heart beat in harmony with the spirits of what she said, I let her know at once that I was not only disposed to duplicate all her actions, but even prepared to go a great deal further if necessary. Delighted with me, she fell to embracing me again, and as it was growing late, we sent out for a chicken and some good wine and supped and slept together, having decided to present ourselves the very next morning at the establishment of Madame Guerin and to ask her to include us amongst her pensionnaires. It was during that supper my sister taught me all I still did not know about libertinage. She showed herself naked to me, and I can warrant that she was one of the prettiest creatures there was in Paris at the time, the fairest of skin, the most agreeable plumpness, yet the most supple and intriguing figure, the loveliest blue eyes. And all the rest correspondingly fine. I also learned for how long Guerin had been promoting her interests, and with what great pleasure she procured her clients who, never tired of her, asked for her constantly. No sooner were we in bed than it occurred to us we had managed very badly in failing to give the Father Superior a reply, for our negligence might annoy him, and while we remained in this quarter of town it was important to humor him at least. But what was to be done? 11 o'clock had struck, we resolved to let things take their course. The adventure probably meant a great deal to the Superior, we supposed, and hence it was not difficult to surmise that he was laboring more in his own behalf than in that of the alleged happiness he had mentioned in his communication. At any rate, midnight had just sounded when we heard a soft knocking at our door. It was the Superior himself. He had been waiting for us, said he, since 2 in the afternoon, we should at least have given him a response, and, seating himself at our bedside, he informed us that Our mother had decided to spend the rest of her days in a little secret apartment they had at the monastery, and in which she was having the world's most cheerful time, improved by the company of all the house's bigwigs who would drop in to spend half the day with her. And with another young woman, our mother's companion, it was simply up to us to come and increase the number, but, in that we were a little too young to stay on permanently, he would only contract us to a 3 years' stint, at the end of which he swore we would be guaranteed our freedom and 1,000 crowns apiece. He added that he had been charged by our mother to assure us that we would be doing her a great kindness were we to come to share her solitude. "Father," my sister said most imprudently, "we thank you for your proposal. But at our age we have no inclination to have ourselves locked up in a cloister in order to be whores for priests, we've had enough of that already." The superior renewed his arguments. He spoke with a heat and energy which illustrated his powerful desire to have the thing succeed. Finally, observing that it was destined to fail, he hurled himself almost in a fury upon my sister. "Very well, little whore," he cried, "at least satisfy me once again before I take my leave." And unbuttoning his breeches, he got astride her. She offered no resistance, persuaded that by allowing him to have his way she'd be rid of him all the sooner. And the smutty fellow, pinning her between his knees, began to brandish and then to abuse a tough and leather stout engine, advancing it to within 1/4 of an inch of my sister's face. "Pretty face," he gasped, "pretty little whore's face, how I'll soak it in my fuck, by sweet Jesus." And therewith the sluices opened, the sperm flew out, and the entirety of my sister's face, especially her nose and mouth, were covered with evidence of our visitor's libertinage, whose passion might not have been so cheaply satisfied had his design in coming to us met with success. More complacent now, the man of God's only thoughts were of escape. After having flung a crown upon the table and relit his lantern, "You little fools, you are little tramps," he told us. "You are ruining your chances in this world. May heaven punish your folly by causing you to fall on evil days, and may I have the pleasure of seeing you in misery. That would be my revenge, that is what I wish you." My sister, busy wiping her face, paid him back his stupidities in kind, and, our door shutting behind the superior, we spent the remainder of the night in peace. "You've just seen one of his favorite stunts," said my sister. "He's mad about discharging in girls' faces. If he only confined himself to that, but the scoundrel has a good many other eccentricities, and some of them are so dangerous that I do indeed fear." But my sister was sleepy, she dozed off without completing her sentence, and the morrow bringing fresh adventures with it, we gave no more thought to that one. We were up early, having prettied ourselves as much as possible, we set out for Madame Guérin's. That heroine lived in the Rue Soleil, in a very neat ground-floor apartment she shared with 6 tall young ladies between the ages of 16 and 22, all in splendid health, all very pretty. But, messieurs, you will be so kind as to allow me to postpone giving their descriptions until the proper moment in my story arrives? Delighted by the project which brought my sister to her for a long stay, Madame Guérin greeted us cordially and with the greatest pleasure showed us our rooms. "Young as you may find this child to be," my sister said as she introduced me, "she will serve you well, I guarantee it. She is mild-tempered, thoughtful, has a very good character, and the soul of a thoroughgoing whore. You must have a number of old lechers amongst your acquaintances who are fond of children. Well, this is just what they're looking for, put her to work." Turning in my direction, Guérin asked me if I was willing to undertake anything. "Yes, madam," I answered with something of an indignant air, and it pleased her, anything provided it pays. We were introduced to our new companions, who already knew my sister very well and are of friendship for her promised to look after me. We all sat down to dine together, and such, in a few words, messieurs, was how I became installed in MYJHST brothel. I was not to remain long unemployed. That same evening, an old businessman arrived wrapped up in a cloak, Garin selected him for my first customer and arranged the match. "Ah, this time," said she to the old libertine, leading me forth, "if it's still hairless you like them, Monsieur Duclos, you'll be delighted with the article, or your money back." "Not a hair on her body." "Indeed," said the old original, peering down at me, "it looks like a child, yes indeed." "How old are you, little one?" "9, monsieur." 9 years old. "Well, well. That's how I like them, Madame Garin, that's how I like them, you know. I'd take them even younger if you had any around." "Why, bless my soul, they're ready as soon as they're weaned." And laughing good-naturedly at his remarks, Garin withdrew, leaving us alone together. Then the old libertine came up and kissed me upon the mouth 2 or 3 times. With one of his hands guiding mine, he had me pull from his fly a little device that could not have been more limp. Continuing to act more or less in silence, he untied my skirts, lay me upon the couch with my blouse 7/8 high upon my chest, mounted astride my thighs which he had separated as far as possible, with one hand he pried open my little cunt while the other put all his strength into manipulating his meager machine. "Ah, pretty little bird," he said as he agitated himself and emitted sighs of pleasure, "ah, how I'd tame you if I were still able to, but I can't any more. There's no remedy for it, in 4 years' time this bugger of a prick will have ceased to get stiff. Open up, my dearest, spread your legs." And finally after 15 minutes of struggle, I observed my man to sigh and pant with greater energy. A few oaths lent strength to his expression, and I felt the area surrounding my cunt inundated with the hot, scummy seed which the rascal, unable to shoot it inside, was attempting to tamp down with his fingertips. He had no sooner done so than he was gone like a flash of lightning, and I was still cleaning myself when my gallant passed out on the door and into the street. And so it was I came, messieurs, to be named Duclos. The TI addition in this house was for each girl to adopt the name of her first comber. I obeyed the custom. "One moment there," said the Duc. "I delayed interrupting you until you came to a pause, you are at one now. Would you provide further information upon 2 matters, first, have you ever had any news of your mother, have you ever discovered what became of her? Secondly, was there any cause for the antipathy you and your sister had for her, or would you say these feelings were naturally inculcate in you both? This relates to the problem of the human heart, and 'tis upon that we are concentrating our major efforts." "My lord," Duclos replied, "neither my sister nor I have ever heard the slightest word from that woman." "Excellent," said the Duc, "in that case it's all very clear, wouldn't you say so, Dursit?" "Incontestably," answered the banker. "Not a shadow of a doubt, and you are very fortunate you did not put your foot in that one. Neither of you would ever have got out." "'Tis incredible," Kerval commented, "what headway that mania has made with public." "Why, no, after all, there's nothing more delicious," the bishop replied. "And the second point?" asked the Duc, addressing the storyteller. "As for the second point, my lord, that is to say, as for the reason for our antipathy, I'm afraid I should be hard-pressed to account for it. But it was so violent in our 2 hearts that we both made the avowal that we would in all probability and very easily have poisoned her had we not managed, as it turned out, to be rid of her by other means. Our aversion had reached the ultimate degree of intensity, and as nothing overt occurred to give rise to it, I should judge it most likely that the sentiment was inspired in us by nature." "What doubt of it can there be?" said the Duc. "It happens every day that she implants the most violent inclination to commit what mortals call crimes, and had you poisoned her 20 times over, this act would never have been anything but the result of the penchant for crime nature put in you, a penchant she wishes to draw your attention by endowing you with such a powerful hostility. It is madness to suppose one owes something to one's mother. And upon what, then, would gratitude be based? Is one to be thankful that she discharged when someone once fucked her? That would suffice, to be sure. As for myself, I see therein naught but grounds for hatred and scorn. Does that mother of ours give us happiness in giving us life? Hardly. She casts us into a world beset with dangers, and once in it, 'tis for us to manage as best we can. I distinctly recall that, long ago, I had a mother who aroused in me much the same sentiments Duclos felt for hers. I abhorred her. As soon as I was in a position to do so, I dispatched her into the next world. May she roast there. Never in my life have I tasted a keener delight than the one I knew when she closed her eyes for the last time. At this point dreadful sobs were heard to come from one of the quatrains. It proved to be the Duse. Upon closer examination it was discovered that young Sophie had burst into tears. Provided with a heart unlike those villains, their conversation had brought to mind the cherished memory of her who had given her life, and who had perished in an effort to protect her while she was being abducted. This cruel vision offered itself to her tender imagination, a flood of tears ensued. "Ah, by God, now," said the Dew, "that's splendid. It's for Mama you're crying, is it, my little snot face? Come here, come along, let me comfort you." And the libertine, warmed by what had been happening, by these words of his, and by the effects they produced, displayed a thunderous prick which was apparently speeding toward a discharge. Marie, the quatrain's duenna, led the child forward all the same. Her tears flowed abundantly down her cheeks. The novice's dress she was wearing that day seemed to lend yet more charm to the sorrow which embellished her looks. It was impossible for a creature to be lovelier. "By the holy bugger," quoth the Dew, springing up like one gone out of his mind, "what a pretty mouthful we have here. I'm going to do what Duclos has just described. Smear some fuck on her cunt. Undress her." And everyone silently awaited the issue of this little skirmish. "Oh! my lord," cried Sophie, casting herself at the Dew's feet, "at least respect my sorrow. I groan for my mother's fate. She was dear to me, she died defending me, I shall never see her again. Have pity upon my tears, grant me this one evening of respite." "Why, fuck my eyes," the Dew exclaimed, fondling his heaven-threatening prick, "I'd never have believed the scene could be so voluptuous. Off with her clothes, I tell you to take them off," he roared at Marie, "she should already be naked." And Aline, lying upon the Dew's couch, shed warm tears, so did Adelaide, who was heard to utter a moan in Clerval's alcove. The latter, in no wise partaking of that lovely creature's grief, violently scolded his playmate for having shifted from the position he had commanded her to keep, and, that done, turned an appreciative gaze upon the delicious scene whose outcome interested him exceedingly. Sophie's clothes are removed without the faintest regard for her feelings. She is placed in the posture Duclos has just described. The Dew announces that he is about to discharge. But how is the thing to be done? What Duclos has just related had been performed by a man virtually incapable of an erection, and he had been able to direct his flabby prick's discharge wherever he wished. Such was not the case here. The threatful head of the Dew's engine had not the least inclination to lower the awful stair whereby it seemed bent on cowing heaven. It appeared necessary, so to speak, to place the child on high. No one knew what to do, and the more obstacles were encountered, the more the enraged Dew fumed and blasphemed. Desgranges finally came to the rescue. Nothing that pertained to libertinage was unknown to that sage old dame. She caught up the child and set her so skillfully upon her knees that, whatever the stance the Dew might adopt, the end of his prick was sure to nudge her vagina. 2 servants came up to hold Sophie's legs, and had it been her deflowering hour, never might she have displayed the merchandise to better advantage. But there was yet more to attend to. A clever hand was needed to cause the torrent to leap its banks and to direct the flood fairly to its destination. Blangus had no desire to entrust so important a matter to an untutored child. "Take Julie," Durset suggested, "she'll suit you, she's beginning to frig like an angel." "Bah," muttered the Dew, "I know the clumsy bitch." And she knows her father. No, she'd be panic-stricken, she'd fumble it. Upon my soul, I do recommend a boy for the job, said Kerval. Why not Hercule? His wrist is like a whip. I won't have anyone but Duclos, the Dew answered. She's the best of our frigates, allow her to quit her post for a moment or two. Duclos steps forward, beaming with pride to have been accorded so distinguished a preference. She rolls her sleeve to the elbow and grasps the nobleman's enormous instrument. She sets to rattling that spear, keeps the foreskin snapped broadly back, she moves it with such art, she agitates it by means of strokes so swift and simultaneously so perfectly attuned to the state she observes her patient to be in, that the bomb finally explodes upon the very hole it is to cover, inundating it. The Dew shrieks, swears, storms. Duclos is disconcerted not in the least, she gauges her movements by the degree of pleasure they produce. Antinos, properly situated for this function, delicately works the sperm into the vagina as proportionally it flows from the spigot, and the Dew, vanquished by the most delicious sensations, dying from joy, sees grow gradually slack, between his trigger's fingers, that high-spirited, mettlesome member whose ardor has just been so powerfully communicated to the rest of himself. He flings himself back upon his sofa, Duclos strides back to her throne, the child wipes herself, is consoled, and regains her quatrain, and the recital continues, leaving the spectators convinced of a truth wherewith, I believe, they have already been penetrated for a long time, that the idea of crime is able always to ignite the senses and lead us to lubricity. I was greatly surprised, said Duclos, taking up the thread of her narrative, to see all my companions laugh when I returned, and ask me if I had wiped myself, and say 1,000 other things which proved they knew perfectly well what had just happened. I was not long left in my quandary, leading me into a room adjacent to the one in which the parties ordinarily took place and in which a short while before I had been at work, my sister showed me a hole to see everything that transpired there. She told me that the young ladies found it diverting to watch what men did to their colleagues. I could come and do some spying whenever I wished, provided there was not someone already at the hole. For it not infrequently occurred, said she, that this respectable hole had a part in mysteries which would be disclosed to me later on. The week was not out before I took advantage of my opportunities. One morning someone came and asked for a girl named Rosalie, one of the most lovely blondes it were possible to behold. I was curious to see what was to be done to her. I hid myself and witnessed the following scene. The man with whom she had to cope was no older than 26 or thwty. Immediately she entered, he had her sit down on a very high stool used especially for this ceremony. As soon as she was settled, he removed all her combs and hairpins, and down all the way to the floor floated in a cloud the superb golden hair that adorned Rosalie's head. He drew a comb from his pocket, combed her hair, took handfuls of it, tangled it, kissed it. Everything he did was accompanied by remarks praising the beauty of that hair in which he took such a keen and exclusive interest. At last, from out of his trousers he pulled a smart little prick, already quite stiff, and he promptly enveloped it in his Dulcinea's hair. Once well wrapped, he began to fondle his dart and discharged, at the same time passing his other arm around Rosalie's neck and applying his lips to her mouth. He extricated his defunct engine. I saw that my companion's hair was matted with glistening fuck. She cleaned it, put it up again, and our lovers separated. A month later, someone came in quest of my sister. This personage, I was told by the others, merited observing, for he had a most baroque specialty. He was a man of about 50. Straightway he entered, without any preamble, without a caress, he exhibited his behind to my sister, who knew her part to perfection. He has her take her place on the bed, he backs toward her, she seizes that flaccid and wrinkled old ass, drives her 5 fingers into the orifice, and begins to struggle and battle and worry it with such force the bed creaks. Be that as it may, without bringing anything else to light, our man wriggles, twitches, follows my sister's movements, lends himself luxuriously to this fearful abuse, cries he is coming. Comes, and affirms this is the greatest of all pleasures. He had indeed taken a furious buffeting, my sister was in a sweat, but what mild stuff! What lack of imagination! Although the gentleman with whom I had to do not long afterward was hardly more difficult to satisfy, he at least seemed more voluptuous and, in my view, his mania had more of the libertine tincture. He was a heavy-set man of about 45, short, sturdy, but energetic and hearty. Never having met a person with his predilection, my first act, as soon as we were alone together, was to hoist my skirts to the navel. A dog confronted by a hickory stick could not have looked more unhappy. Good God, dearie, let's not have any of your cunt, please put it away. So saying, he snatched down my skirts even more hastily than I had raised them. These poor little whores, he mumbled, screwing up his face in a pout, never have anything but cunts to show you. I may not be able to discharge this evening, thanks to that exhibition, unless I can succeed in getting the accursed image of that cunt out of my head. Whereupon he turned me about and methodically raised my petticoats from behind. Guiding me himself, and keeping my skirts raised at all times, he moved me about in order to observe how my buttocks bounced when I walked, and then he had me approach the bed, upon which he had me lie belly down. Next, with the most scrupulous attention he examined my ass, with one hand screening his eyes to avoid any glimpse of my cunt whereof, it appeared, he was in mortal terror. At last, having warned me to do all in my power to conceal that unworthy, I employ his expression, part from his sight, he brought both hands to bear on my ass and manipulated it lewdly, and at length, he opened it, he closed it again, spread and squeezed it, sometimes he applied his mouth to it, and once or twice I even felt him press his lips to the hole, but he still had not touched himself, nothing could be discerned. None the less, he must have felt hidden pressures mount and readied himself for the denouement of his little ritual. Lie down, he told me, tossing a few pillows on the floor. Yes, down there, that's it, that will do, with your legs well spread, the ass a shade higher, and the hole stretched as wide open as it will go. Come now, wider still, he continued, noticing my docility. And then, taking a stool and placing it between my legs, he sat down in such a way that his prick, which he now dragged from his breeches and began to vibrate, was as it were at a level with the hole upon which he was to offer a libation. His movements now grew more rapid. With one hand he frigged himself, with the other he separated my buttocks, and a few adulatory commendations seasoned with a quantity of hard language constituted his speech. Ah, bugger the almighty, here 'tis, the lovely ass, he cried, the sweet little hole, and how I'm going to wet it. He kept his word. I felt myself soaked, his ecstasy seemed to annihilate the libertine. Ah, how true it is that the homage rendered at this temple is always more ardent than the incense which is burned at the other, and my worshipper left after promising to return to see me again, for he averred I satisfied his desires very well. He did indeed come back the next day, but was untrue to me. His inconstancy led him to my sister's asshole. I observed them, saw everything, every aspect of the rite was absolutely the same, and my sister lent herself to it with the same goodwill. Did your sister have a handsome ass? Dursett inquired. You may judge by one fact, my lord, Duclos replied. A famous painter commissioned to do a Venus with a magnificent behind asked her the following year to be his model after having, he said, consulted every procuress in Paris without finding anything to equal her. Well now, since she was 15 and since we have a few girls of the same age here, compare her ass, the financier continued, with some of the asses you see in this room. Duclos' eyes came to rest upon Zellmeyer, and she told Dursett that it would be impossible, not only with respect to the ass, but even with respect to the face, to find anyone who bore a closer resemblance to her sister. In that case, said Dorset, come here, Zellmeyer, present your cheeks. She did indeed belong to his quatrain. The charming girl approached all a tremble. She was placed at the foot of the couch, made to lie upon her belly, her rump was raised by means of cushions, the little hole was in plain sight. The lecher's prick begins to rise, he falls to kissing and fondling what lies under his nose. He orders Julie to frig him, she sets to work, his hands stray hither and yon, snatching at divers objects, lust heats his brain, under Julie's voluptuous treatment his little prick looks as if it were about to stiffen, the lecher swears, the fuck flows, and the bell sounds for dinner. As the same profusion reigned at every meal, to have described one is to have described them all, but as almost everyone had discharged, there was a general need to recuperate strength, and therefore the friends drank a great deal at this supper. Zellmeyer, to whom they gave the sobriquet of Duclos' sister, was to an uncommon degree regaled during the subsequent orgies, and everyone simply had to kiss her ass. The bishop left a puddle of fuck thereon, the three others restiffened over it, and they went to bed as they had the night before, that is to say, each with the wife he had had upon his couch, and with one of the four fuckers who had not appeared since the midday meal. The third day he do was abroad at 9 o'clock. 'Twas he who volunteered to be the first to lend a hand in the lessons Duclos was to administer to the little girls. He installed himself in an armchair and for 1 long hour submitted to various fondlings, masturbations, pollutions, and to a wide variety of tricks performed by each of those little ones who, throughout it all, were guided and supervised by their mistress, and as may be readily imagined, his spirited temperament was furiously aroused by the ceremony. He was obliged to make unbelievable efforts to preserve his fuck from loss, but, more or less in control of himself, he managed to contain himself and returned to his friends in triumph, boasting that he'd just weathered an assault he defied any one of them to beat off as phlegmatically. That brought on considerable wagering, the stakes were high, a fine of 50 louis was ultimately imposed upon whoever discharged during the lessons. Instead of taking breakfast and conducting searches, this morning was employed in drawing up a program for the 17 orgies planned for the end of each week, in this way definitively to fix the dates of the deflowerings now that, after having become better acquainted with the subjects than they had been previously, they were able to pass legislation. In that this timetable in the most decisive manner regulated all the operations to be executed during the campaign, we have deemed it necessary to provide the reader with a copy. It seems to us that, once he has perused it and familiarized himself with the subject's several destinies, he will be able to take a keener interest in their individual persons. Schedule of works to be accomplished during the remainder of the part. On the 7th of November, at which time the first week will have drawn a close, messieurs shall proceed in the morning to the marriage of Michet and Guiton, and those two wedded individuals, whose age forbids them from conjoining, as is true in the cases of 3 following couples, shall be separated on their marriage night, for to closet them together would be as futile as this ridiculous ceremony which will serve only to create diversion during the day. That same evening, punishments which have accumulated and been entered on the list kept by the month's presiding officer shall be meted out. On the 14th, messieurs shall in the same way effect the marriage of Narcisse and Hebe, with the same clauses as those cited above. On the 21st, in the same way, Colombe and Zélimir shall be married. On the 28th, Cupidon and Rosette. On the 4th of December, Champville's narrations having prepared the way for the following enterprises, the deux shall deflower Fanny. On the 5th, the said Fanny shall be wedded to Hyacinth who, in the presence of the company assembled, shall take his pleasure with his young wife. In such will consist the 5th week's festival, and the corrections shall take place in the evening as usual, because the marriages shall be celebrated in the morning. On the 8th, Curval shall deflower Michet. On the 11th, the deux shall deflower Sophie. On the 12th, to celebrate the 6th week's festival, Sophie shall be married to Celadon, and the clauses cited for the above-mentioned marriage shall be made to apply to this one, This shall not be repeated. For those to follow. On the 15th, Kerval shall deflower Hebe. On the 18th, the dew shall deflower Zelmire, and on the 19th, in order to celebrate the 7th week's festival, Adonis shall marry Zelmire. On the 25th, Christmas Day, the dew shall deflower Augustine, and on the 26th, for the 8th week's festival, Zephyr shall marry Augustine. On the 29th, Kerval shall deflower Rosette, and all the foregoing arrangements have been made to ensure that Kerval, less well-membered than the dew, be provided with more youthful girls. On the 1st of January, the first day of the year and one upon which Martin's newly begun narration will influence imaginations to consider new pleasures, the sodomistic deflorations shall be inaugurated, and shall proceed in the following order. On the 1st of January, the dew shall sound Hebe's s. On the 2nd, in celebration of the 9th week, Hebe, having been plumbed for by Kerval, from behind by the dew, shall be turned over to Hercule, who, before the company assembled, shall employ her for purposes to be specified upon the occasion. On the 4th, Kerval shall embugger Zelamir. On the 6th, the dew shall embugger Michet. On the 9th, in celebration of the 10th week's festival, the said Michet, who will have been deflowered for by Kerval, and whose ass will have been tried by the dew, shall be turned over to Bumcleaver, that he may enjoy her, etc., etc. On the 11th, the bishop shall sodomize Cupidon. On the 13th, Kerval shall sodomize Zelmire. On the 15th, the bishop shall sodomize Colombe. On the 16th, for the 11th week's festival, Colombe, whose cunt will have been deflowered by Kerval, her ass by the bishop, shall be turned over to Antinoius, who shall enjoy her, etc. On the 19th, Kerval shall embugger Sophie. On the 21st, the bishop shall embugger Narcissus. On the 22nd, the dew shall embugger Rosette. On the 23rd, for the 12th week's festival, Rosette shall be turned over to Invitus. On the 25th, Kerval shall march into Augustine's behind. On the 28th, the bishop shall enter Fanny's. On the 30th, for the 13th week's festival, the dew shall take Hercule for his husband and Zephyr for his wife, and the marriage shall be both accomplished and consummated before the eyes of everyone, as shall be the 3 others which follow. On the 6th of February, for the 14th week's festival, Bumcleaver shall become Kerval's husband, Adonis his wife. On the 13th of February, for the 15th week's festival, Antinoius shall be made husband to the bishop, to him shall Celadone be made a wife. On the 20th of February, for the 16th week's festival, Invitus shall as a husband be wedded to Dursit, Hyacinth as a wife. As for the festival of the 17th week, due to fall on the 27th of February, upon the eve of the narration's conclusion, it shall be celebrated by sacrifices for which messengers reserve themselves in petto the choice of victims. These arrangements provide for the obliteration of all maidenheads by the 30th of January, with the exception of those of the 4 young boys whom messengers are to marry as wives, and whom they are eager to preserve intact until their weddings, in order that their amusement be made to last until the end of the party. As the objects are progressively depucelated, they shall the place of the wives upon the couches at storytelling time, and, at night time, they shall lie with messengers, alternately, and at Messer's choice. Together with the last 4 fairies messengers will take to themselves as wives during the final month. From the moment a girl or a depucelated boy shall have replaced a wife upon the couch, the said wife shall be repudiated. From this moment onward, she shall be in general discredit, and shall be ranked lower than the servants. With regard to Hebe, aged 12, Michet, aged 12, Colombe, aged 13, and Rosette, aged 13, as progressively they are surrendered to the fuckers and exercised by the latter, they too shall fall into discredit, shall henceforth be used for none but harsh and brutal purposes, shall rank with the repudiated wives, and shall be treated with utmost rigor. and as of the 24th of January, all 4 of them will have descended to the same inferior level. This schedule affirms that unto the dew shall fall 9 pucelages, the first enchantments of Fanny, Sophie, Zelmire, Augustine, the original embuggeries of Hebe, Michet, Giton, Rosette, and Zephyr. Unto Curval shall fall the cuntpucelages of Michet, Hebe, Colombe, Rosette, the aspucelages of Zelamir, Zelmire, Sophie, Augustine, and Adonis, being in all 9 deflorations. Unto Durcid, who does not fuck at all, is reserved the aspucelage of Hyacinth, who in the capacity of a wife shall be wedded to him. And unto the bishop, who fucks naught but asses, are reserved the sodomistical depucelations of Cupidon, of Colombe, of Narcisse, of Fanny, and of Celadon. The entire day having been spent preparing this program and chatting about it, and no one having been found at fault, all went uneventfully ahead. The storytelling hour arrived, everyone took his place, the illustrious Duclos mounted the stage. She proceeded in this wise: a young man, whose mania, although not in my opinion very libertine, is none the less curious enough, appeared at Madame Guerin's shortly after the adventure I spoke of yesterday. He had to have a young and healthy wet nurse, he suckled the good woman's teat and leaked his seed over her thighs while gorging himself on her milk. His prick struck me as paltry and mean, all his person rather puny, and his discharge was as mild as his proceedings were benign. Another one appeared in the same room the next day, his mania will doubtless prove more entertaining to you. He insisted upon having his woman enveloped in a sheet so that her face and breast would be entirely hidden from him, the single part of her body he wanted to see, and which had to be of the highest degree of excellence, was her ass. All the rest meant nothing to him, and he assured Madame Guerin that a glimpse of anything else would anger him exceedingly. Guerin had a woman brought in from the outside. She was ugly to the point of bitterness and almost 50 years old, but her buttocks were molded like those of Venus. Nothing more beautiful could ever bewitch one's gaze. I was eager to see this operation. The old duenna, well wrapped up, was told at once to lie belly down on the edge of the bed. Our libertine, a man of about 30 and who seemed to me a gentleman of the cloth, lifts her skirts above her loins, is thrilled by what greets his eyes and flatters his tastes. He touches, he spreads this superb breech, showers passionate kisses upon it, and, his imagination fired by what he supposes rather than by what he would actually have seen had the woman been unveiled and even had she been attractive, he fancies he is holding commerce with Aphrodite herself, and at the end of a fairly brief career, his engine hardens thanks to the jerks and jolts, and unlooses a warm rain over the ensemble of the sublime ass exposed to his view. His discharge was sharp and impetuous. He was seated facing the adored idol, one of his hands opened it while with the other he polluted it, and he cried 10 times in succession, "Ah, what a beautiful ass! Ah, what a delight to drown such an ass in fuck!" He rose when done, and left, without indicating the least desire to find out with whom he had been dealing. A young abbot called for my sister a short time afterward. He was youthful and handsome, but one could scarcely discern his prick, so minute and soft it was. He stretched his almost naked partner on a couch, knelt down between her thighs, supporting her buttocks with both hands, with one of them tickling the pretty little hole in her behind. Meanwhile, he conveyed his mouth to my sister's cunt. He tickled its clitoris with his tongue, and managed so cunningly, so harmoniously synchronized the two activities, that within the space of 3 minutes he had plunged her into a delirium. I saw her head toss about, her eyes begin to roll, and heard the rascal cry, "Ah, my dear Reverend Father, you're slaying me with pleasure." The abbot's custom was simply to swallow the liquid his libertine dexterity made flow, and this he did not now fail to do, shaking himself the while, agitating himself as he bore down upon my sister. I saw him spatter indubitable evidence of his virility upon the floor. My turn came the next day, and I believe I can assure you, messieurs, that it was one of the sweetest operations to which in all my life I have ever been exposed. That scoundrel of an abbot had my first fiats, and it was into his mouth I shed my first fuck. More eager than my sister to give him pleasure in return for what he had caused me, I unthinkingly seized his drooping prick, and my little hand replied to what his mouth had made me feel with such delight. The Jew could not prevent himself from interrupting at this point. To a remarkable degree excited by the pollutions he had undergone that same morning, he had an idea that this species of lubric sport executed with the fascinating Augustine, whose sparkling, roguish eyes announced the most precocious temperament, would deliver him of a charge of fuck that was stinging his balls in a dreadful way. She was a member of his quatrain, he found her likable, she was destined to be deflowered by him, he summoned her. On this particular evening she had a kerchief tied round her head, was clad in peasant guise, and seemed charming beneath that costume. The duenna hoisted her skirts and established her in the posture Duclos had represented. The Jew first of all lay hands on her buttocks, knelt, brought a finger to the anus and lightly titillated its rim, seized up the clitoris this amiable child already had in considerable growth, and sucked it. The people of Languedoc are high-spirited, they say, and Augustine proved them right. Fire leapt into her pretty eyes, she sighed and panted and moaned, her thighs rose mechanically, and the Jew was pleased to sip a gush of young fuck which in all likelihood had never flowed before. But joy is seldom succeeded by joy. There are libertines so hardened in vice that the simpler, the more delicate and banal be the thing they do, the less effect it has upon their execrable minds. Of their number our beloved Jew was one. He swallowed that delicious child's sperm without his own contriving to flow. All present beheld the moment arrive, for no one is more illogical than a libertine. The moment appeared at hand, I say, when he would blame his unresponse upon the poor little wretch who, all adither at having yielded to nature, was hiding her face in her hands and struggling to get free and return to her place. "Get me another one," thundered the Jew, casting furious glances at Augustine. "I'll suck every last one of them if that's required to lose my fuck." Zelmire, the second girl in his quatrain, was brought to the fore. She too was the Jew's biased cheat. Though equal in years to Augustine, the grief for her plight robbed her of the power to taste a pleasure which, who knows, had it not been for that, nature might have allowed her to relish. Up rose her skirts, up above two little thighs whiter than alabaster, a chubby little mons veneris hove into view. It was upholstered by a fluffy down just beginning to appear. She is adjusted, obliged to yield, she obeys automatically, but sweat, strain, suck though he does, nothing happens to the Jew. 15 minutes of this and he rises in a fury, and, flinging himself into his closet with Hercule and Narcisse, "Ah, by fuck," he roars. "It's very clear to me that's not the game I'm hunting, 'tis to the two little girls he alludes, and that I'll only have a fair shot at this." It is not known to what excesses he surrendered himself, but ere an instant had passed screams and shouts declared he had carried the day, and proved that boys are always the far more certain implements to a discharge than the most adorable girls. In the meantime, the bishop had likewise enchambered himself with Guiton, Zelamir, and Invitus, and the outbursts which accompanied his discharge having struck the assembly's ears, the two brothers, who had probably resorted to similar expedients, returned, more calmly to listen to the rest of the story. Our heroine took up again in these terms. "Nigh unto 2 years passed by, during which time no one of particular interest arrived at Madame Guérin's. The gentleman who called either had tastes too ordinary to warrant description, or had tastes analogous to those I have already described, and then one day I was told to prepare myself, and above all to wash out my mouth. A heavy, thick-set man of about 50 stood beside the mistress of the house. 'Well, there she is,' said Madame. 'She's only 12, monsieur, just as clean and tidy as if she'd come this morning out of her mother's belly, and you can take my word for that. The customer inspects me, has me open my mouth, he examines my teeth, sniffs my breath, and evidently satisfied that all is in order, he goes with me into the sanctuary intended for pleasure. We sit down face to face and very near to one another. No one could be more solemn than my gallant nor more phlegmatic. He stares coldly at me, then appraises me with narrowed eyes. I have no idea where all this is leading when, finally breaking his silence, he bids me collect a mouthful of saliva. I obey, and as soon as he fancies my mouth must be full, he throws himself upon my neck, passionately puts his arm around my head, thereby immobilizing it, and gluing his lips to my mouth, he pumps, sucks, eagerly swallows all the bewitching fluid I have collected, and it seems enough to put him in an overwhelming ecstasy. He sucks my tongue into his mouth with identical fervor, and when he senses it is dry, perceives my mouth is empty, he commands me to repeat the operation. He reiterates his, then I do, then he does, and so on 8 or 10 times over. He sucked up my saliva with such furious avidity it discomfited my chest and lungs. I thought that at least a few sparks of pleasure were going to climax his transports. I was mistaken. His apathy, whence he emerged only brief instants during his most intense suckings, compassed him again immediately he had drained me, and when at last I told him I could do no more, he fell to eyeing me distantly, to staring at me as he had at the beginning, then got up without a word, paid Garin, and left. Ah, God's prick and balls, cried Kerval, I'm happier than he, for I'm coming. Everyone raised his head, everyone saw the dear president doing to Julie, his wife, whom that day he had for couch companion, the same thing Duclos had just been relating. That this passion appealed admirably to his tastes was generally well known. Julie by and large procured him abundant pleasure in this manner. Duclos had no doubt done less well by her gallant. But that was in all likelihood his own fault, failing to appreciate what certain mouths, in certain conditions, may offer. He got nothing from Duclos, whereas the president obtained satisfaction from Julie's. A month later, said Duclos, who had been invited to continue, I had dealings with a sucker who assailed what one might term the same fort but from an entirely different angle. This latter was an elderly abbot who, after having previously kissed and caressed my bum for above half an hour, introduced his tongue into its hole, made it penetrate deep, dart to left and right, turn this way, turn that way, all with such surpassing art I thought I felt it drive nigh to the depths of my entrails. But this abbot of mine, much less phlegmatic, as he used one hand to spread my buttocks, used the other to frig himself very voluptuously, and as he discaged he drew my anus to his face with such violence and tickled it so lubriciously that my ecstasy coincided with his. When he was finished, he spent another moment scrutinizing my buttocks, staring at that hole he'd just reamed wider, and couldn't prevent himself from gluing his mouth to it one last time. Then he hastened off, assuring me he would be back frequently, would ask for me, and that he was most content with my s. He kept his promise, and for 6 months he came to visit me 3 or 4 times a week, regularly performing the same operation to which I became so thoroughly accustomed that each time he executed his little project, I all but expired with delight an aspect of the rite about which he appeared to care very little, for, as best I could judge, he had no inclination to find out whether or no my work pleased me. That did not seem to matter to him. And indeed, who can tell? Men are extraordinary indeed. Had he known of it, my pleasure might even have displeased him. And now Dursit, whom the story had inflamed, like the old priest was moved to suck some asshole or other, but would not have a girl's. He called for Hyacinth, who of them all pleased him the most. He placed the little chap, kissed his ass, frigged his prick and sucked it. By the nervous shuddering of his body, by the spasm which ordinarily heralded his discharge, it was thought the evil little anchovy that Aline was thumping and pulling as best she could, was finally going to disgorge its seed. But no, the financier was penurious when it came to parting with his fuck. He simply could not, or would not, stiffen. It occurs to them all that his object ought to be changed. Celadone is substituted for Hyacinth, but all's at a standstill. not the least improvement is apparent. The opportune tolling of a bell announcing supper saves the banker's honor. "Why," says he, laughing with his confrères, "it's not my fault, you saw I was about to win a victory, this damned supper will have to delay it. Well, by God, let's go and have a fling at the table, I'll return all the more ardent to Cupid's tyranny after having been crowned by Bacchus." The evening meal was equally succulent and gay, quite as lubricious as ever, and was followed by orgies in the course of which an abundance of little infamies were perpetrated. Many were the mouth sucked and the asses, but one of the most engaging drolleries of all was the game in which they hid the face and chest of each little girl and gambled upon recognizing her on the basis of a study of her ass. The Dew was occasionally misled, but not so the others, for they were too well accustomed to the use of the bum. The friends retired for the night. And the morrow brought further and new pleasures, and a few reflections. The fourth day being full eager to be able to distinguish immediately which of the youngsters in either sex was, in a depulatory sense, to belong to each of their number, the friends decided to have them wear, regardless of their costume and, in that other extreme, even when undressed, a hair ribbon, which would indicate of whom the individual child was the property. Colors were thereupon chosen, the Dew adopted pink and green, whosoever should wear a pink ribbon to the fore, would be his by the cunt, similarly, whosoever wore a green ribbon to the rear, would be his by the s. And so Fanny, Zellmeyer, Sophie, and Augustine straightway affixed a pink ribbon on one side of their